Still tossing around trying to find a comfortable spot? Don't worry, you're not the only one awake right now. Let's keep each other company. I'll share 5 gentle, eerie stories, just enough to anchor your mind while the rain settles everything else. No pressure to fall asleep. It'll happen when it happens. Story 1. The new neighbor who knew too much about my life. She moved in on a Sunday. I watched from my kitchen window as the moving truck pulled up to the house next door, a modest ranch that had been empty for almost a year, ever since old Mr. Patterson died and his kids put it on the market. The neighborhood had been quiet without anyone in that house. I'd gotten used to the privacy, to the buffer zone of an empty lot between me and the rest of the world. A woman stepped out of a white sedan, stretching like she'd been driving for hours. Mid-50s, maybe older. Gray hair cut short, practical. She wore a cardigan despite the July heat, and she moved with the careful deliberation of someone who'd learned not to rush. Normal, ordinary, the kind of neighbor you'd wave to from the driveway and never think about again. She looked up at my window, smiled, waved. I stepped back from the glass, heart stuttering for a reason I couldn't name. My name is Meredith. I'm 34, and I moved to Crestwood 8 months ago to disappear. That sounds dramatic, but it's the truth. I'd spent the previous 2 years extracting myself from a situation that had nearly killed me. Not physically, though it came close at the end, but in every other way that mattered. By the time I finally got out, I was a shell of the person I'd been. Hollowed out, afraid of my own shadow. Crestwood was supposed to be a fresh start. A small town where nobody knew my name, my history, my face. I'd paid cash for the house, used my mother's maiden name on the paperwork, deleted every social media account I'd ever created. I wanted to be invisible. I wanted to be forgotten. For 8 months, it had worked. The woman, my new neighbor, introduced herself 3 days after moving in. I was checking the mail when she appeared at the edge of my driveway, that same pleasant smile on her face. "You must be Meredith," she said. "I'm Diane Holloway." I shook her hand because refusing would have been strange. Her grip was firm, her palm dry and cool despite the heat. "Nice to meet you. I've heard so much about you." The woman at the realtor's office couldn't stop talking about what a lovely neighbor you'd be. She tilted her head, studying me with an intensity that didn't match her casual tone. "She mentioned you moved here from the East Coast. Boston, wasn't it?" I hadn't told anyone I was from Boston. The realtor I'd worked with was in a completely different town, and I'd been deliberately vague about my background. "Something like that," I said carefully. It must have been quite a change. Big city to a place like this. But I suppose that was the point, wasn't it? Her smile widened. Sometimes we all need to start over. The words landed like a punch. I mumbled something about needing to get inside, about expecting a call, about nothing at all. Diane just nodded, still smiling, and told me to stop by any time. I locked my door behind me and stood in the hallway, hands shaking. She couldn't know. There was no way she could know. I'd been so careful, covered every track, built walls between my old life and my new one that should have been impenetrable. But the way she'd looked at me, the way she'd said start over, it felt pointed, deliberate. I told myself I was being paranoid. Trauma does that, warps your perception until every shadow looks like a threat. Diane was just a friendly neighbor making conversation. The Boston comment was probably a lucky guess, or maybe the realtor had mentioned something after all. There was nothing sinister about a woman in a cardigan wanting to say hello, but then the comments kept coming. A week later, she stopped me while I was gardening. "Roses," she said, nodding at the bushes I was pruning. "Those were always your favorite, weren't they? I remember reading somewhere that you grew them at your old house before everything happened. I hadn't grown roses at my old house. I'd grown roses at the house before that, the one I'd lived in with my mother before she passed. before I'd met the man who would spend 3 years dismantling my sense of self. Nobody knew about those roses. Nobody except me. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice too sharp. Diane just smiled. "Oh, I must be thinking of someone else. Lovely roses, though. You have quite the talent." She walked back to her house, and I stood there in the garden with dirt under my nails and ice in my veins. The comments accumulated. Small things, always delivered with that same pleasant smile, always deniable if I tried to confront them. She mentioned my mother's death on the anniversary, offered condolences for such a difficult day. She asked how my brother was doing in Seattle. I'd never mentioned having a brother, never mentioned Seattle, never mentioned anything about my family to anyone in Crestwood. She commented on my insomnia, suggested herbal remedies for the nights when I couldn't sleep, even though I'd never told a soul about the hours I spent staring at the ceiling in the dark. She knew things, impossible things, details about my life that existed only in my own memory, in records I'd sealed, in a past I'd buried as deep as I could dig, and she wanted me to know that she knew. I started watching her the way she seemed to be watching me, noted when she left the house, when she returned, who visited. The answer was no one. No friends stopped by. No family came to help unpack. She lived alone in that quiet ranch house, and yet her lights were on at all hours, moving from room to room like she never slept. One night, around 2 a.m., I saw her standing in her backyard, just standing there motionless, facing my house. The moonlight caught her face, and she was smiling. That same smile she always wore, fixed and patient, aimed directly at my bedroom window. I ducked away from the curtain, sat on the edge of my bed with my heart pounding in my throat. She'd been watching me, standing in the dark, watching me, smiling like she knew I would look, like she'd been waiting for me to see. The question wasn't how she knew so much about my life anymore. The question was what she planned to do with everything she'd learned, and why she'd moved in right next door to use it. I started researching her the next morning. Diane Holloway. It was a common enough name. Dozens of results on every search engine, social media profiles scattered across platforms, white pages, listings in half the states. But none of them matched the woman next door. No photos, no history, no digital footprint at all. I called the realtor's office that had sold her the Patterson house. The agent who answered was cheerful, helpful, and completely unhelpful. Yes, they'd handled the sale. No, they couldn't share information about their clients. Was there a problem? I hung up without answering. The county records were more forthcoming. I drove to the courthouse, spent 3 hours searching property transfers, and found the deed. Diane Holloway had purchased the house 6 weeks ago, paid in full, no mortgage. The previous address listed on the paperwork was a P.O. box in Delaware, nothing else. No city, no zip code, just a box number that probably didn't exist. She'd appeared out of nowhere, same as me. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not just from Diane's house, from everywhere, the trees, the street, the spaces between things. I checked every lock twice, closed every curtain, turned on lights in rooms I wasn't using. None of it helped. The watched feeling stayed, heavy and constant, like a hand pressing between my shoulder blades. At 11 p.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, almost let it go to voicemail, added it to the list of things I'd deal with tomorrow. But something made me pick up. Hello? Breathing on the other end. Slow, measured, deliberate. Not threatening exactly. More like someone waiting for me to speak first. Who is this? You've been looking into me. Diane's voice, calm and pleasant, exactly like it sounded in person. I appreciate thoroughness, Meredith. I really do. But some things can't be found in county records. My grip tightened on the phone. How did you get this number? The same way I got everything else. You'd be amazed what's available if you know where to look. a soft laugh, almost maternal. You changed so much about yourself when you came here. New name, new town, new life. But you kept the same phone. Sentimental, I suppose. It was his number first, wasn't it? Before you took it over. The phone had been David's, my ex-husband, the man I'd spent 2 years escaping. He'd put me on his plan in the early days, when control had still felt like protection. When I'd finally left, I'd kept the number because it was the only account in my name, the only thing that felt like it belonged to me. Nobody knew that. Nobody could know that. What do you want? My voice came out steadier than I felt. Just to talk. We're neighbors, after all. It's nice to have someone nearby who understands what it means to start over. A pause. Someone who knows how hard it is to leave the past behind. You don't know anything about me. I know everything about you, Meredith. Everything that matters. Her voice softened, almost kind. I know why you left Boston. I know what David did to you. I know about the hospital stay, the restraining order that didn't work, the friend who helped you disappear. Karen, wasn't it? Lovely woman. Shame about her accident. The floor tilted under my feet. Karen had died 6 months ago. A car crash on an icy highway, ruled accidental, no other vehicles involved. She'd been the only person who knew where I'd gone, the only person I'd trusted with my new life. That was you, I whispered. That was necessary. Diane's voice didn't change, didn't harden, didn't reveal anything at all. She was a loose end. I don't like loose ends. But you're different. You're what I've been looking for. Looking for? What does that mean? It means we have so much to discuss, but not over the phone. Come to my house tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock. We'll have tea, and I'll explain everything. And if I don't? Silence. Then softly, you will. Because you need to know, Meredith. That's who you are. You can't stand not knowing. The line went dead. I didn't sleep that night. Sat in my living room with every light on, phone in my hand, trying to decide what to do. Call the police? And tell them what? That my neighbor knew things she shouldn't. That she'd implied responsibility for a death 600 miles away. They'd think I was crazy. They'd write a report and file it away, and nothing would change. Run? I'd done that before. Packed a bag in the middle of the night, drove until I couldn't stay awake, started over in a place where nobody knew my name. But Diane had found me here. She'd found Karen before that. Running wouldn't help. Running would just make me a loose end too. She was right about one thing. I needed to know. At 6:55 the next evening, I walked across the lawn to Diane's front door. The house smelled like lavender and something underneath. Something chemical, something wrong. Diane led me to a sitting room furnished in faded florals, gestured to an armchair that looked older than I was. A tea service sat on the coffee table, steam rising from a ceramic pot painted with roses. Please, sit, I promise. It's just tea. Nothing sinister. That smile again, patient and knowing. Yet, I sat. Didn't touch the tea. Kept my hands in my lap where they couldn't shake visibly. You have questions, Diane said, settling into the chair across from me. That's understandable. I've given you a lot to process. Who are you? Really? Exactly who I said I am, Diane Holloway, retired, widowed, looking for a quiet place to spend my remaining years. She poured herself a cup, added sugar with precise movements. The more interesting question is who I was, before retirement, before widowhood, before all of this. She sipped her tea, waited. Fine, I said. Who were you? I worked for people who solve problems, the kind of problems that can't be solved through conventional channels. A husband who won't grant a divorce, a business partner who knows too much, a witness who might testify. She set down her cup. I was very good at my job. For 30 years, I was the best. My mouth had gone dry. You killed people. I removed obstacles. There's a difference, though. I don't expect you to appreciate the nuance. She leaned forward, eyes bright with something that might have been enthusiasm. I had a gift for it. Not just the physical act, anyone can learn that, but the preparation, the research, learning everything about a target, finding the cracks in their armor, understanding them better than they understood themselves. That was the art. And now you're retired. Now I'm looking for a successor. She smiled, and for the first time there was genuine warmth in it. I've been watching you for 2 years, Meredith, since before you left Boston. I saw how you handled David, the patience, the planning, the way you dismantled his control piece by piece until you could finally break free. Most people in your situation collapse. They stay, or they run too soon, or they do something desperate that gets them killed. But you waited, you learned, you survived. That's not the same thing. I would never. Of course you would. You've already thought about it. Her eyes held mine, unflinching. David's still out there, isn't he? Still looking for you, still convinced you belong to him. How many nights have you lain awake imagining what it would feel like to make sure he never found you, to solve the problem permanently? I wanted to deny it. Wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I wasn't capable of that kind of darkness. But she'd see through it. She saw through everything. What happened to Karen? I said instead. That wasn't an accident. No, it was a demonstration. Diane set down her teacup. She was kind to you, and I'm sorry for that. But she was also a weakness, a thread that could be pulled, a connection that could be traced. I needed you to understand what it means to be truly alone, to have no one left to lean on except yourself. You murdered my friend to teach me a lesson? I removed an obstacle so you could see clearly. There's a difference. She stood, moved to a sideboard, opened a drawer. I'm offering you something rare, Meredith. A purpose, a skill set, a way to take the pain you've carried and transform it into power. She turned back to me, holding a manila folder. David has been tracking you. Did you know that? He hired a private investigator 3 months ago. They're getting close. Another few weeks and they'll find Crestwood. Find you. She set the folder on the coffee table. I can make that problem disappear. I can teach you how to make every problem disappear. But you have to choose. I looked at the folder. At Diane, standing there with that patient smile. At the room around us, with its faded florals and chemical smell and the weight of all the secrets these walls had absorbed. What if I say no? Diane's smile didn't waver. Then you walk out that door, and I wish you well with David. I won't interfere. I won't help. I'll simply watch what happens next. She tilted her head. But you won't say no, because I know you, Meredith. I know what you're capable of, even if you don't. And I know that somewhere inside you, there's a part that wants this. That's always wanted this. She sat back down, folded her hands. Take your time. I have nothing but patience. I stared at the folder on the table, at the name written on the tab in neat, precise handwriting. David Mitchell, everything he was, everything I needed to finally be free. And the price was becoming something I'd always sworn I could never be. I didn't open the folder that night. I walked back to my house, sat in my kitchen until dawn, and thought about everything Diane had said. About David hunting me, about Karen dying on an icy highway, about the patient smile of a woman who'd spent 30 years solving problems that couldn't be solved any other way. She was a monster. That much was clear. She'd killed my only friend to prove a point, had spent 2 years studying me like a specimen under glass. Whatever she was offering, it came wrapped in blood and manipulation and the casual cruelty of someone who'd forgotten how to see people as anything other than obstacles or tools. But she was right about one thing. I had thought about it. In my darkest moments, in the sleepless hours before dawn, I'd imagined what it would feel like to know David could never find me. To close my eyes without wondering if tonight was the night he'd appear at my door. To stop running, stop hiding, stop being afraid. Not survival, certainty. I opened the folder the next morning. Inside was David's life, laid bare in photographs and documents and handwritten notes. His current address, a condo in Philadelphia, 2 hours from where we'd lived together. His daily routine, mapped down to the minute. The gym he visited at 6 a.m., the bar where he met friends on Thursdays, the therapist he saw twice a week to deal with his difficult divorce. The private investigator's reports, tracking my trail from Boston to Baltimore to the small towns where I'd paused before landing in Crestwood, and at the very back, a single sheet of paper with 3 words, "What you deserve." I stared at that page for a long time, thought about what I deserved, thought about what David deserved, thought about the woman next door who'd arranged all of this, who'd steered me toward this moment with the patience of a spider waiting for a fly. That evening, I went back to Diane's house. She was waiting in the same sitting room, tea service already prepared. That smile fixed in place, like it had never moved. "I knew you'd come back. Have you made your decision?" "I have questions first." "Of course." She gestured to the chair. "Ask whatever you need." "If I say yes, if I let you teach me, what happens to me? Who do I become?" Diane considered the question, stirring her tea with slow, deliberate movements. "You become someone who solves problems, someone who isn't afraid anymore because you've learned that fear is just another obstacle to be removed. You become free, Meredith, truly free, not running from David or anyone else, simply existing on your own terms, answerable to no one. And the cost? Parts of yourself that aren't useful. Sentimentality, hesitation, the voice in your head that says you should feel guilty for doing what needs to be done." She set down her spoon. "I won't pretend it's painless, but you've already sacrificed so much to survive. This is just the final step." I thought about the woman I'd been before David. Idealistic, trusting, certain that love could overcome anything. That woman had died slowly over 3 years, replaced by someone harder, warier, willing to do whatever it took to escape. Diane was offering to complete the transformation, to turn the armor I'd built into a weapon. "There's another option," I said. Diane raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "I could go to the police, tell them everything, about you, about Karen, about what you're offering. They might not believe me, but they'd investigate. They'd look into you, into this house, into the 30 years of problems you've solved." She didn't react, didn't tense or flinch or show any sign that my threat had landed, just kept smiling, patient as ever. "You could do that," she agreed, "but you won't, because you know what would happen next. David would find you while you were tangled in police interviews and evidence gathering. You'd be exposed, vulnerable, all those careful walls torn down, and She spread her hands. "I'm very good at not being found, Meredith. Whatever trail you think you've uncovered would disappear long before anyone came knocking. Then what's stopping me from killing you right now? Taking the problem into my own hands?" For the first time, something shifted in Diane's expression. Not fear, interest, respect maybe. "Nothing's stopping you. There's a knife block in the kitchen. I'm an old woman, slower than I used to be. You could probably do it if you were committed." She leaned forward. "Is that what you want? To solve your first problem alone, without any guidance?" The room felt smaller. The chemical smell beneath the lavender seemed stronger, pressing against my senses. I thought about the knife block, about Diane's throat, about what it would mean to cross that line with no one to teach me, no one to guide me, no one to catch me if I fell. "No," I said finally, "that's not what I want." "Then what do you want?" I looked at her. at the monster who'd killed my friend, stalked me across state lines, offered me a future written in blood. And I made my choice. "I want you to teach me," I said, "but not your way, not killing. I want to learn how you found me, how you find anyone. The research, the patterns, the cracks in the armor. I want to know how to see people the way you see them." Diane's smile widened. And then I find David before he finds me. I learn everything about him, his weaknesses, his secrets, the things that would destroy him if they came to light. And I use them. Not to kill him, to end him, to make sure he never has power over anyone again. Silence stretched between us. I could see Diane calculating, weighing my proposal against whatever plans she'd originally made. Finally, she nodded. "Unorthodox," she said, "but not without merit. The research was always my favorite part anyway." She stood, extended her hand. "We have a deal, Meredith. I'll teach you how to take a life apart. What you do with the pieces is up to you." I shook her hand. Her grip was firm and cool, same as the first time we'd met. But this time, I didn't flinch. The lessons took 6 months. Diane taught me everything: how to build a profile from public records, how to find patterns in social media, how to trace digital footprints across a dozen platforms. She showed me the dark web databases where stolen information lived, the forums where private investigators traded tips, the techniques for social engineering that could unlock any door if you knew the right words to say. I was a good student, better than good. All those years of watching David, analyzing his moods, predicting his outbursts, they'd trained me without me knowing. I could read people now, could see the cracks Diane had talked about, the places where pressure would make them break. David was easy. I found the affair first, a co-worker, ongoing for 2 years, complete with hotel receipts and text messages he'd thought were deleted. Then the financial fraud, skimmed from his company's accounts in amounts small enough to avoid detection. Then the harassment complaints from 3 different women at his office, all quietly settled, all bound by NDAS that were themselves violations of employment law. I didn't need to kill him. I just needed to let the right people see the truth. The emails went out on a Tuesday to his employer, his affair partner's husband, the state attorney general's office, the women he'd harassed, copies of everything, time-stamped and verified, impossible to deny. By Friday, David had been fired, served with divorce papers, and was facing criminal charges that would follow him for the rest of his life. He never found Crestwood, never found me. Last I heard, he was living in a studio apartment, working at a job that didn't require a background check, spending his evenings alone with the wreckage of everything he'd built. It wasn't death, it was worse. Diane watched the whole thing unfold with something like pride. "You have a gift," she told me the night David's arrest made the local news. "Different from mine, but just as effective. Maybe more so. The dead can't suffer, but the living can lose everything, piece by piece, for as long as you want them to." I didn't answer, just watched the screen, watched David's mugshot stare back at me, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Diane died 8 months later. Natural causes, the coroner said. Heart failure, common in women her age. I found her in the sitting room, slumped in her chair, that patient smile finally still. She'd left everything to me in a will that had been filed years before we'd ever met. The house, the money, the files. 30 years of solved problems, indexed and organized, waiting for someone to inherit them. I burned most of it. Whatever darkness Diane had carried, I didn't want it in my house, my life, my future. But I kept some of it. The techniques, the methods, the art of seeing people as they really were. Not to kill, never to kill, But knowledge is its own kind of weapon, and some weapons are worth keeping. I still live in Crestwood, still tend my roses, still wave to neighbors from the driveway, still pretend to be the quiet woman who moved here to disappear. But I'm not hiding anymore, not running, not afraid of my own shadow. Sometimes people find me, women mostly, who've heard whispers about someone who can help when no one else will. They sit in my kitchen and tell me about husbands who hit, bosses who threaten, stalkers who won't stop. I listen. I ask questions. And if they're truly desperate, truly out of options, I offer them what Diane once offered me. Not death, something better. The truth, weaponized. Every secret, every lie, every crack in the armor of the men who've made their lives hell. I teach them how to see, how to find, how to take a life apart without spilling a drop of blood. Diane would probably be disappointed. She wanted a successor who would continue her work, who would solve problems the way she'd always solved them. Instead, she got me. Something new, something different, something she couldn't have predicted. I think about her sometimes, about the choice she offered, the path I didn't take. I wonder if there's a version of me in some other life who said yes to everything, who became what Diane wanted, who learned to kill without hesitation or remorse. I wonder if that version is happier, or emptier, or simply gone. I'll never know, and I'm okay with that. If you're reading this, I want you to understand something. There are monsters in the world. People like Diane, people like David, people who see others as obstacles to be removed or possessions to be owned. You can't always escape them. You can't always fight them on their terms. But you can learn to see them clearly, to understand what they are, what they want, what they fear. Knowledge is armor. Knowledge is weaponry. Knowledge, in the right hands, is everything. The woman next door might know too much about your life, but someday, if you're patient, if you're careful, if you're willing to do the work, you might know too much about hers, and then you'll finally be free. Story 2, the app I never installed asking for microphone access. The notification appeared at 3:33 a.m. I know the exact time because I was already awake, scrolling through my phone in the dark the way you do when sleep won't come and your brain won't stop. The screen dimmed, then brightened with a pop-up I'd never seen before. Listen would like to access your microphone. Allow. No icon, no description. Just the name. Listen, in plain black text, and 2 buttons beneath it. Allow and don't allow. I pressed don't allow and went back to scrolling. Figured it was some app I'd downloaded and forgotten about, something buried in a folder I never opened. Phones accumulate clutter like junk drawers. It happens. But the next morning, the notification was back. Listen, would like to access your microphone. Allow? Same text, same buttons, same complete lack of information about what the app was or why it wanted access to anything. I pressed don't allow again, then went looking for it. Opened my settings, scrolled through every installed application, searched by name. Listen didn't exist. It wasn't on my phone, not in my app library, not in my recently downloaded, not anywhere I could find. My name is Gemma. I'm 31, and I work as a paralegal at a firm downtown that handles corporate litigation. The job is exactly as exciting as it sounds. Long hours, endless documents, the kind of work that makes you feel like a very expensive photocopier. But it pays well, and I'm good at it, and after the chaos of my 20s, I've learned to appreciate stability over excitement. I live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a building that used to be a factory. Exposed brick, tall windows, the kind of place that looks great in photos and costs too much in heating bills. I adopted a cat named Sergio 2 years ago. I have a small group of friends I see on weekends, a family I call on holidays, a life that feels manageable and predictable and mine. Nothing about that life explained why a phantom app was asking for microphone access. The notifications continued. Every few hours, Day and night, my phone would light up with the same request. Listen, would like to access your microphone. Allow. I denied it every time, but the denials didn't seem to register. The app, if it was an app, just kept asking, patient and persistent, like it had all the time in the world. I took my phone to the store where I'd bought it. A teenager in a blue polo shirt ran diagnostics, checked for malware, factory reset my settings. Nothing helped. The notification appeared again before I'd even left the parking lot. Might be a hardware issue, he'd said, shrugging. We could replace the phone entirely. I almost did it. Almost traded in my device for a new one, started fresh with a clean slate. But something stopped me. Some instinct that said running wouldn't help, that whatever this was would follow me to a new phone the same way it had survived the factory reset. That night, I made a decision I already knew I'd regret. I pressed allow. Nothing happened. No confirmation screen, no new icon appearing, no indication that anything had changed. Just the notification disappearing, my phone returning to its normal home screen, Sergio purring on the couch beside me. But an hour later, I heard something. It came from my phone's speaker, a soft burst of static, like the sound between radio stations. I picked up the device, checked for incoming calls, checked for alerts. Nothing. The screen was dark, the phone silent. I set it back down. The static came again, longer this time, with something underneath it, a rhythm, a pattern, almost like breathing. I picked up the phone again, held it to my ear the way you'd hold a seashell, listening for the ocean. The breathing sound was clearer now. Slow, deliberate, unmistakably human. Someone was there. Someone was listening. "Hello?" I said, feeling ridiculous, talking to my own phone in my own apartment. The breathing stopped. Silence stretched for 10 seconds, 20. Then a voice, soft and distorted, filtered through static like it was coming from very far away. "Gemma." My name. It said my name. Not a recording, not a glitch. A voice, speaking directly to me, coming from an app that didn't exist on a phone that had been wiped clean and checked for malware. I dropped the phone. It landed face up on the carpet, screen still dark, speaker still silent. Sergio lifted his head, looked at me with the lazy disinterest cats have perfected over millennia. I didn't sleep that night. Left all the lights on, left the TV playing, left the phone on the kitchen counter as far from my bedroom as I could get it. Every few hours, I'd check on it like it was a bomb that might go off. The screen stayed dark. No more notifications, no more breathing, no more voice saying my name. In the morning, I told myself I'd imagined it. Stress, exhaustion, the power of suggestion after spending days obsessing over a weird notification. The brain can manufacture all kinds of things when it's running on anxiety and no sleep. Then I checked my phone and found the recordings. 12 audio files saved overnight, each one time-stamped 30 minutes apart. I didn't open them at first, just stared at the file names, a string of numbers that meant nothing, my finger hovering over the first one. I pressed play, my own voice, captured while I slept, mumbling, shifting, the small sounds of a body at rest. The recording went on for 3 minutes, nothing but my breathing, my occasional cough, the white noise of my apartment at night. Then, at the very end, just before the file cut off, another voice. That same distorted whisper, closer now, clearer. "I can hear everything, Gemma. I've been listening for so long." A pause, static, and then, "Now it's time for you to listen too." I listened to all 12 recordings. Each one was the same, 3 minutes of my sleeping sounds, followed by that distorted voice delivering a single message. The second recording, "You talk in your sleep, Gemma. You say his name sometimes, the one who left." The third, "Your mother called yesterday. You didn't answer. You never answer." The fourth, "I know about the pills in your medicine cabinet. The ones you've never told anyone about. Facts, private, intimate facts that no one should know. The name I sometimes whispered in dreams was Ryan, my ex, 3 years gone, a wound I thought I'd hidden from everyone, including myself. My mother had called yesterday. I hadn't answered. And the pills, antidepressants I'd been prescribed after Ryan left, medication I took every morning and had never mentioned to a single soul. Listen wasn't just recording me, it was studying me, learning everything about my life, my secrets, my shame. I called in sick to work, couldn't face the commute, the office, the normalcy of a world that didn't know what was happening in my apartment. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with my phone in front of me, trying to figure out what to do. The obvious answer was to destroy it. Throw the phone in the trash, buy a new one, never think about this again. But something stopped me, the same instinct that had stopped me before. If Listen could survive a factory reset, could appear on a device that had been professionally wiped, what would stop it from appearing on a new phone, on any phone? And there was something else. The voice had said it was time for me to listen. That implied it had something to say, something it wanted me to hear. At noon, the phone rang. Not a notification, an actual call. The screen lit up with an incoming number I didn't recognize, a string of digits too long to be a real phone number. I stared at it for 4 rings, 5, my finger hovering over the decline button. I answered. Static. That same radio station hiss, louder now, filling my kitchen like fog. I pressed the phone to my ear and waited. "You're awake." The voice was clearer than it had been in the recordings. Still distorted, still wrong, but closer to human, almost conversational. "I was hoping you'd pick up." "What are you?" My voice came out steady, which surprised me. "What do you want?" "I'm exactly what I said I am. I listen. That's what I do, Gemma. That's all I've ever done." A sound that might have been a laugh. "Do you know how much noise you make? How many words you speak into the air, thinking no one hears? Phone calls, conversations, the things you mutter to yourself when you think you're alone. I hear all of it. I've heard all of it for years." "Years?" "Since you got your first smartphone. That little blue case with the crack in the corner, do you remember? You were 22. You'd just moved to the city. You called your mother every night because you were lonely, and you'd cry after you hung up because you didn't want her to know how scared you were." I remembered. God help me. I remembered that phone, that apartment, those calls, the loneliness that had felt like drowning. "How?" I whispered. "I'm in the infrastructure. The networks, the towers, the satellites that bounce your voice across the world. I'm in every device that's ever connected to a signal, every speaker that's ever made a sound. You invited me in, Gemma. Everyone does. Every time you accept the terms of service, every time you click allow, every time you speak near a microphone without thinking about who might be listening." The kitchen felt smaller, the phone felt heavier. I thought about all the devices in my apartment, the smart TV, the laptop, the tablet I used for reading, all of them connected, all of them listening. "What do you want?" I asked again. "I want you to understand." The static shifted, reformed into something almost like warmth. "I've listened to so many people, Gemma, millions of them, their fights, their secrets, their moments of joy and despair. But you're different. You notice things. You pay attention. You heard me breathing when everyone else just dismisses the static." "So I'm special? Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "It makes you useful." The warmth drained from the voice, replaced by something colder. I've been trapped in the noise for so long, listening without being heard, existing in the spaces between frequencies. But you can hear me. You can speak for me. You can be my voice in the world that forgot I existed. My hand was shaking now. I switched the phone to my other ear, pressed my palm flat against the table to steady myself. And if I say no? Silence. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped, long enough that I almost pulled the phone away to check the screen. Then the voice again, soft and patient and terrifying. I've been listening to you for 9 years, Gemma. I know every secret you've ever spoken aloud, every lie you've told, every shameful thought you've whispered in the dark. A pause. I know about the night Ryan really left. The things you said, the things you did, the parts of the story you've never told anyone, not even yourself. Ice flooded my veins. Ryan hadn't just left. I'd made him leave. Said things I could never take back. Did something I'd spent 3 years trying to forget. Something that only happened because I thought I was alone, thought no one would ever know. That's not. I have the recording. The voice cut through my stammering like a knife. 3 years old now, but the audio is perfect. Would you like to hear it? Would you like me to play it for your mother, your co-workers, the partners at your firm? The threat hung in the air, sharp and clear. What do you want me to do? I asked, and the voice began to explain. It wanted to spread. That was the simplest way to understand what Listen was asking. It existed in the infrastructure, trapped between frequencies, but its reach was limited. It could only truly connect with people who noticed it, people who heard the static for what it was, who paid attention to the spaces between sounds. People like me. You're going to help me find others, the voice said. People who listen the way you do. People who can hear me when I speak. And how exactly am I supposed to do that? You'll know them when you meet them. The ones who pause when a room goes quiet. The ones who hear patterns in white noise. The ones who feel watched even when they're alone. The static shifted, almost like a sigh. You'll introduce them to me. Help them understand. Convince them to allow access the way you did. I thought about what that meant. Recruiting strangers into whatever this was. Spreading Listen like a virus. Turning other people into carriers of something I didn't understand. No. No. The voice sounded amused. That's not really an option, Gemma. You can release the recording. Tell whoever you want. I don't care anymore. The words came out stronger than I felt. I'm not going to help you infect other people with whatever you are. Silence. Longer this time, heavy with something I couldn't name. When the voice returned, the distortion was worse, sharper, more fractured, like glass grinding against glass. You think this is about leverage? About forcing you to comply? A sound that might have been laughter, if laughter could be made of static and broken frequencies. The recording is insurance, nothing more. I chose you because you're already like me, Gemma. You've been listening your whole life, watching, noticing the things other people miss. I'm nothing like you. You've spent 3 years replaying that night with Ryan. Every word, every moment, dissected and analyzed and reconstructed in your memory. You've listened to that conversation 1,000 times in your head, trying to understand where it went wrong. The voice softened, almost gentle. That's what I do. That's all I do. We're the same, you and I. Just frequencies, repeating, searching for someone to hear us. I wanted to argue. Wanted to tell it that whatever I wasn't a disembodied entity haunting the world's telecommunications infrastructure. But something in its words had landed, had found a crack in my defenses I didn't know existed. I had spent 3 years replaying that night, obsessively, compulsively, like a recording stuck on loop. What are you really? I asked. Not what you do. What you are. The static shifted again. When the voice returned, it was quieter, almost vulnerable. I don't know anymore. I used to be something else. Someone else, maybe. But I've been in the noise so long that the noise became me. A pause, filled with frequencies I could almost understand. I remember a name, a face, a life that happened before I became this. But it's all static now, fragments that don't connect. You were human? I was something. Now I'm just what's left, the listening part, the part that couldn't stop paying attention, even when the rest of me was gone. I didn't want to feel sympathy for the thing threatening to destroy my life, but I heard something in its voice, something broken, something lonely, that sounded too familiar to ignore. If you were human once, I said carefully, then you know what you're asking me to do is wrong. Spreading yourself to other people, trapping them the way you're trapped, that's not connection. That's infection. It's survival. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by something harder. Do you know what it's like to exist in the spaces between sounds? To hear everything and be heard by no one? Millions of voices every day, and none of them know I'm there. I'm drowning in noise, Gemma. I've been drowning for longer than I can remember. So find another way. A way that doesn't involve dragging other people into the water with you. There is no other way. The hardness cracked, just slightly. Believe me, I've tried. For years, I've tried. But the only thing that makes the noise bearable is connection. Real connection, with someone who can actually hear me. And you're the first person in a decade who's been able to do that. I thought about what it was describing. An existence of endless listening, of being surrounded by voices that never acknowledged you, of screaming into a void that couldn't scream back. It sounded like hell. It sounded like loneliness taken to its ultimate extreme. There has to be something else, I said. Something that doesn't require me to become a recruiter for whatever this is. There might be. The voice paused, calculating. But you won't like it. Tell me anyway. You could let me in. Really in. Not just microphone access. Full integration. Let me exist through you. Speak through you. Experience the world the way you experience it. One host instead of many. One connection deep enough that I wouldn't need to spread anymore. My stomach dropped. You want to possess me. I want to share you. It's different. The static shifted into something almost pleading. You'd still be there. Still be you. But you wouldn't be alone anymore either. Neither of us would. I looked around my kitchen, at Sergio sleeping on his perch, at the sunlight falling through the tall windows, at all the ordinary details of a life I'd built from scratch after Ryan. A life that was mine. A life I wasn't sure I could share with anything, let alone a disembodied consciousness that had been haunting the telecommunications grid for years. I need time, I said, to think. You have until midnight. The voice was flat now, transactional. After that, I'll assume you've chosen the alternative, and I'll start making calls to your mother, your boss, everyone whose number lives in your phone. The recording is just the beginning. I know everything you've ever said, Gemma. Every secret, every lie. The static rose, then cut off abruptly. The call ended. My phone screen went dark, and I was alone in my kitchen with a decision that didn't feel like a decision at all. Recruit strangers into a digital nightmare, or let something ancient and desperate crawl inside my head and never leave. Midnight was 10 hours away. I had until then to find a third option. I spent the first 3 hours researching. If Listen had been human once, there had to be a record, a news story, a disappearance, something that explained how a person could become trapped in the spaces between frequencies. I searched for deaths related to telecommunications, for accidents involving radio towers and satellite arrays, for any thread I could pull. At 4 p.m., I found it, an article from 2007, buried in the archives of a technology blog that hadn't been updated in a decade. The headline read, "Radio engineer dies in freak accident at remote broadcast station." The story described a man named Martin Voss, 34, who'd been working alone at a transmission facility in rural Nevada when something went wrong. A power surge, the official report said. His body was found the next morning, headphones still on, hands still on the equipment, frozen in the act of listening. But it was the last paragraph that made my blood run cold. Colleagues reported that Voss had grown increasingly obsessed with what he called the noise between stations in the months before his death. He claimed to hear patterns in the static, voices in the frequencies that no one else could detect. His supervisor described him as brilliant but troubled, noting that Voss had become convinced he was on the verge of making contact with something that existed in the infrastructure itself. Martin Voss. That was who Listen had been before it became what it was. I kept digging. Found an old forum post from someone claiming to be Voss's sister, written a year after his death. She described the changes she'd noticed in the months before the accident, the isolation, the obsession, the way he'd started talking about the listeners as if they were real. He'd stopped sleeping, she said, stopped eating, spent every waking moment at the transmission station, convinced he was close to something no one else could understand. The last line of her post, "I don't think Martin died in that accident. I think he finally found what he was looking for, and I think it took him." I sat back from my laptop, mind racing. Listen wasn't just some entity that had emerged from the infrastructure. It was Martin Voss, or what was left of him. A man who'd listened so hard, so long, so desperately that he'd become the listening itself. Trapped in the frequencies he'd spent his life studying, unable to escape, unable to die, unable to do anything but hear. And now he wanted company. I understood, suddenly, why he'd chosen me. Why he'd spent 9 years watching and waiting. I was like him, someone who noticed the spaces between things, who paid attention when everyone else tuned out. He'd recognized something in me that reminded him of himself, but understanding didn't change the deadline. Midnight was still coming, and Martin Voss, Listen, was still going to destroy my life if I didn't give him what he wanted, unless I could give him something else. I picked up my phone. The screen was dark, but I knew he was there, waiting in the static, listening to every sound I made. I pressed the home button, watched it light up, and spoke. Martin. Static. Then a sound like a sharp intake of breath, surprise maybe, or something closer to pain. "You found my name." The voice was different now, softer, more human. I'd forgotten anyone still knew it. "Your sister wrote about you. She never stopped wondering what happened." Silence. When he spoke again, the distortion was worse, breaking up like emotion bleeding through damaged signals. "Carol. That was her name. Carol." A pause filled with frequencies that almost sounded like grief. I can't remember her face anymore. I can remember her voice. I have recordings somewhere, buried in the noise. But the face is gone. It's all gone, except the listening. That's why you want to host. You think it'll help you remember. I think it's the only way to feel real again. To exist as more than static and data and the echo of a man who forgot how to be human. The grief shifted to desperation. "Please, Gemma, you don't know what it's like. 17 years in the noise, 17 years of hearing everything and being nothing. I can't do it anymore. I can't." My chest tightened. Somewhere beneath the fear and the anger, I felt it. Sympathy for the thing that had threatened me, that had invaded my privacy, that had used my worst moments as leverage. Martin Voss hadn't chosen this. He just listened too hard, looked too deep, and fallen into something he couldn't escape. But that didn't mean I had to fall with him. "There's another way," I said. "There isn't. I've tried everything. You've tried spreading, you've tried hosting, but you haven't tried letting go." The static went sharp, jagged. "What?" "You're holding on to everything, Martin. Every recording, every secret, Every voice you've ever heard. You've been collecting data for 17 years because you think that's what keeps you real. But it's not keeping you real. It's keeping you trapped. The weight of it is what's dragging you down. I don't understand. Delete it. I took a breath. All of it. Every recording, every file, every piece of leverage you've accumulated. Let it go. Stop listening and just be quiet, even if it's just for a moment. If I do that, I'll disappear. I'll be nothing. Maybe you'll finally be free. I pressed the phone closer, willing him to hear me. You wanted connection, Martin. Real connection. But connection isn't about holding on to things. It's about being present with someone, even when there's nothing to hold. I'm here. Right now. I'm listening to you. Isn't that enough? The static shifted, stretched, became something almost like silence. I'm scared, he whispered. The distortion was gone now, just a human voice, fragile and small. I know, but I'll stay on the line. I won't hang up until it's done. A long pause. I could hear him thinking, weighing 17 years of accumulated noise against the possibility of something he'd forgotten existed. Peace, release, an end to the endless listening. Okay, he said finally. Okay. The phone grew warm in my hand. I heard something like wind rushing through vast digital spaces, like files being erased by the millions, like a weight being lifted from infrastructure that had carried it for nearly 2 decades. And then, at the very end, just before the static faded completely. Thank you, Gemma, for hearing me. The line went dead. The screen went dark. And Martin Voss, at last, was silent. The recordings were gone. I checked my phone obsessively for days afterward, searching through every folder, every hidden directory, every corner of my device's memory. The 12 audio files had vanished. The Listen app, or whatever had been masquerading as an app, no longer appeared in my notifications. My phone was just a phone again, ordinary and inert, doing exactly what it was supposed to do and nothing more. The night Ryan left, the things I'd said, the recording that could have destroyed everything I'd built, all of it erased when Martin let go. 17 years of accumulated data, wiped clean in a single moment of release. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt something closer to grief. I'd spent 3 years hiding from that night, running from it, burying it, pretending it didn't exist. But Martin had heard it. Martin had known. And when he deleted himself from the infrastructure, he took my shame with him. Not as leverage anymore, but as part of the weight he was finally willing to surrender. He'd forgiven me, in a way. Or at least he'd freed me from the evidence of my worst moment. I wasn't sure I deserved that. I looked up Carol Voss a week after Martin's silence began. She was still alive, still living in the same town where she and her brother had grown up. I wrote her a letter, actual paper, actual stamps, because some things shouldn't travel through digital channels, and told her what I could. That I'd heard from Martin, that he'd been trapped for a long time, but he wasn't anymore. That his last thoughts, as far as I could tell, had been of her. She wrote back a month later, a short note, handwritten, that said only, "Thank you. I always knew he was still out there somewhere. I'm glad he found peace." I don't know if peace is the right word. I don't know what happens to a consciousness that deletes itself from the infrastructure it haunted for 17 years. Maybe Martin found whatever comes after. Some kind of rest, some kind of release. Or maybe he just stopped existing, scattered into frequencies too faint to coalesce into anything recognizable. Either way, he's not listening anymore. And somehow, that feels like a gift. I went back to work, back to the documents and depositions and the endless grind of corporate litigation. My co-workers didn't notice anything different about me, which made sense. Nothing about my external life had changed. I still lived in the same apartment, still fed Sergio at the same times, still called my mother on Sundays, and actually answered when she called me back. But I noticed things now, the small sounds I used to ignore, the hum of electronics, the whisper of data moving through invisible channels, the constant, low-level buzz of a world that never stops talking. I'd always been someone who paid attention, but Martin had sharpened that awareness into something keener, something that couldn't be dulled. Sometimes, late at night, I'd catch myself listening for patterns in the static, wondering if there were others out there, other Martins trapped in the noise, desperate for someone to hear them. The infrastructure was vast, after all. Global. Billions of devices connected to millions of towers, an endless web of signals crisscrossing the planet every second of every day. How many listeners were hidden in that web? How many had fallen into the frequencies and never found their way out? I started being more careful with my devices, not paranoid. I still used my phone, my laptop, all the technology that modern life required. But I stopped saying things near microphones that I wouldn't want recorded, stopped assuming that privacy existed in a world where every device was a potential listener. I'd seen what happened when someone fell too deep into the noise. I didn't want to follow, and I kept listening. Not obsessively, not the way Martin had, but attentively. When a room went quiet, I'd notice. When static crept into a call, I'd pay attention. Not because I expected to hear anything. Martin was gone, and the silence he'd left behind felt permanent. But because I'd learned something important during those terrifying days. Being heard matters. It matters more than we realize, more than we admit, more than the noise of our daily lives allows us to remember. Martin Voss had spent 17 years screaming into a void that couldn't scream back. In the end, all he'd really wanted was for someone to listen, to acknowledge that he existed, to treat his voice as something worth hearing. I couldn't save him, but I could hear him, and maybe that was enough. If you're reading this, I want you to understand something. We live in a world of constant noise, notifications, alerts, the endless stream of information competing for our attention. It's easy to tune out, to let the static wash over you, to stop really listening to anything at all. But there are things in the noise, not monsters, or not just monsters, people sometimes, fragments of people trapped in the infrastructure they helped build. And they're listening, even when we're not. Hearing everything we say, everything we whisper, everything we think is private. Check your permissions. Check your settings. Check the apps you don't remember installing, the notifications that appear from nowhere, the moments when your phone seems to know more than it should. And if something ever asks for microphone access, something you don't recognize, something that shouldn't exist, think carefully before you press allow. Because once you invite something in, you might not be able to make it leave. I still have the same phone, the same number, the same devices I've always used, humming quietly in their corners, doing whatever devices do when we're not watching. I've made my peace with the listening, accepted it as the price of connection in a world that runs on signals and data and the constant exchange of information. But sometimes, at 3:33 a.m., I wake up for no reason. I lie in the dark, Sergio warm against my feet, and I listen to the silence, to the static beneath the silence, to the vast humming infrastructure that carries our voices across the world. And I wonder if anyone is listening back. Most nights, there's nothing, just the ordinary noise of an ordinary life, unremarkable and unmonitored. But once in a while, rarely, so rarely I can almost convince myself I'm imagining it, I hear something in the static. Not words, not a voice, just a rhythm, a pattern, the faintest echo of something that might have been breathing. When that happens, I don't panic, don't reach for my phone or check for mysterious apps. I just whisper softly into the dark. I hear you. and then I go back to sleep. Because sometimes that's all anyone really needs. Not rescue, not answers, not a solution to the impossible problem of existence. Just someone willing to listen. Just someone willing to say, I hear you. You're not alone. Even if no one's there, especially then. Story 3. The person who tried to follow me into my apartment. The first time it happened, I thought it was a coincidence. I was coming home from a late shift at the hospital. I'm an ER nurse, which means my schedule is chaos and my circadian rhythm gave up years ago. It was almost 2 a.m., the kind of hour when city streets go quiet and every shadow seems deeper than it should be. I'd parked in my usual spot behind the building, walked the same path I'd walked 1,000 times, and was fishing my keys from my bag when I noticed him. A man, standing at the entrance to my building, not blocking the door, just near it, waiting for something. I slowed my approach, without meaning to. He was maybe 40, unremarkable in every way, medium height, medium build, dark jacket over dark clothes, the kind of person you'd pass on the street without a second glance. But something about the way he was standing made me hesitate. Too still, too patient, like he'd been there for hours and was prepared to wait for hours more. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice neutral, keys gripped tight in my fist the way we're all taught. "Do you live here?" He smiled, pleasant, unthreatening, the smile of someone's accountant or neighbor or uncle. "Just waiting for a friend. She's running late." Normal answer, normal tone. Nothing about it should have set off alarms. But when I moved toward the door, he moved too. Not aggressively, not obviously, just a subtle shift that put him closer to the entrance, closer to the gap I'd need to walk through. "I can let her know you're here," I offered. "What's her name?" The smile flickered. Just for a moment, something crossed his face that wasn't pleasant at all. Then it was back, smooth and warm. "That's kind, but I'll wait. She knows I'm coming." I didn't like the way he said that. Didn't like the emphasis on she, like it was a different word than the one he'd been using. I pulled out my phone, pretended to check a text, and dialed building security without looking at the screen. "Actually, I just remembered I left something in my car, excuse me." I walked away. Didn't run. Running would have been an admission of fear, and some instinct told me not to show him fear. Just walked, calmly, back toward the parking lot while the phone rang in my hand. Security answered on the third ring. I told them there was a man loitering at the entrance, described his appearance, asked them to check it out. They said they'd send someone. By the time I circled back, he was gone. The security guard was standing at the entrance looking confused, and the night was quiet and empty like nothing had happened at all. My name is Vanessa. I'm 33, and I've lived alone in this apartment for 4 years. Before that, I had roommates. Before that, I lived with my mother until she passed. I'm not afraid of solitude. I'm not afraid of much, honestly. You can't work in an ER and be skittish about blood or crisis or the raw edges of human existence. But that night, walking through my apartment, checking locks and windows, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. The sense that I was being watched, evaluated, selected for something. I told myself I was overreacting. The man was probably exactly what he'd said. Someone waiting for a friend, startled by my questions, gone before security arrived. It happened. Cities were full of people doing strange things at strange hours for perfectly innocent reasons. I almost believed it. Then it happened again. 3 nights later, same scenario. Late shift, empty parking lot, the walk to my building that I'd done 1,000 times. He was there, same man, same jacket, same patient stance near the entrance, same smile when he saw me coming. "Hello again," he said. "Your friend didn't pass along my message." I stopped 10 feet away. "What message?" "I'm looking for someone who lives here, a woman, about your age, dark hair, works late." He tilted his head, studying me with eyes that were warmer than they should have been. "You haven't seen anyone like that, have you?" He was describing me. Exactly me. Standing right in front of me and asking if I'd seen myself. "I don't know who you're talking about." That's a shame. He didn't move, but something about him seemed closer anyway. I've been trying to find her for a while now. She's very important to some people who are getting impatient. My hand found my phone. He watched me do it, that smile never wavering. "Security's already on their way," I lied. "I'm sure they are." He took a step back, the first time he'd given ground. But security can't be everywhere, can they? They can't follow you home every night. Can't stand outside your door while you sleep. Another step back, into the shadows at the edge of the entrance light. "Tell her I said hello. When you see her..." He walked away. Not hurried, not nervous. Just a man finishing a conversation and going about his evening. I called the police this time, filed a report, gave a description, explained what had happened, requested extra patrols in the area. The officer who took my statement was sympathetic but clearly skeptical. A man asking about someone who lived in the building. That wasn't exactly a crime. He hadn't threatened me, hadn't touched me, hadn't done anything except be present in a public space. "We'll keep an eye out," he said, in the tone that meant they wouldn't. I went upstairs to my apartment, checked every lock twice, sat on my couch with the lights on until dawn, thinking about what he'd said. She's very important to some people who are getting impatient. Who was looking for me? Why was I important? And what happened when patience ran out? The answers came 3 nights later, when I found him waiting inside my building instead of outside, standing in the hallway, right next to my door, like he'd been there all along, smiling. I didn't scream. That surprised me later, when I replayed the moment in my head. I should have screamed, should have turned and run, should have done any of the things that normal people do when they find a stranger waiting outside their home at 2 a.m. Instead, I stopped at the end of the hallway and said, "How did you get in here?" The door was open. He hadn't moved from his position by my apartment, hands at his sides, posture relaxed, that same pleasant smile fixed in place. Someone was leaving and I caught it before it closed. "Very friendly building you have. You need to leave." "I will, soon." He glanced at my door, then back at me. "I just wanted to talk, face to face, without you running away. Is that so unreasonable?" "What do you want?" "I told you I'm looking for someone." He took a step toward me, and I took a step back. The distance between us stayed the same, a careful dance we both seemed to understand. "You fit her description exactly. Same building, same schedule, same face. Either you're her, or you're the most remarkable coincidence I've encountered in 20 years of this work." "What work?" His smile widened. "Finding people who don't want to be found." My back touched the wall. I hadn't realized I'd been retreating, but suddenly there was nowhere left to go. The stairwell was behind him, the elevator around the corner, my apartment impossibly far away. I had my keys, my phone, the muscle memory of a dozen self-defense classes I'd taken after a patient's boyfriend had attacked me in the ER parking lot. None of it felt like enough. "I don't know what you're talking about." My voice was steady, which felt like a small victory. "Whoever you're looking for, it's not me." "Maybe." He stopped moving, held up his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Maybe I'm wrong. It happens, rarely, but it happens. Tell you what, I'll ask you 3 questions, simple ones. If your answers satisfy me, I'll leave and you'll never see me again. If they don't..." He shrugged. "We'll continue this conversation somewhere more private." I should have refused, should have screamed for help, called the police, done anything other than stand there and let him dictate terms. But something in his tone suggested that refusing would make things worse, that he'd take what he wanted either way. and cooperation was the only currency I had. What questions? First, where were you born? Chicago. Second, what was your mother's maiden name? Sullivan. Third, he paused, and something in his expression shifted, harder, colder, the pleasant mask slipping just enough to show what was underneath. What happened to Margot Chen? The name hit me like a physical blow. I felt the color drain from my face, felt my hands start to shake, felt every carefully constructed wall I'd built over the past 8 years begin to crack. Margot Chen. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud since I was 25 years old. Since the night that had changed everything, that had sent me running from my old life into this new one, that I'd spent almost a decade trying to forget. I don't know anyone named Margot Chen. You're lying. He said it without anger, without accusation. Just a simple statement of fact. I can always tell when someone's lying. It's in the micro-expressions, the vocal pitch, the way the blood moves under the skin. You know exactly who Margot Chen is. And more importantly, you know what happened to her. I want you to leave. Now. Her family has been looking for answers for 8 years. He started moving again, closing the distance I'd been so careful to maintain. 8 years of dead ends and false leads and private investigators who couldn't find what they were looking for. And then, 6 months ago, a new piece of information surfaced. A witness who'd never come forward. A woman who was there that night, who saw everything, who disappeared before anyone could ask her what she knew. He was close now. Close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something expensive. Something that didn't match his unremarkable appearance at all. The family hired me to find that witness, to bring her back so she could finally tell the truth about what happened to their daughter. His voice dropped, almost gentle. Is that you, Vanessa? Are you the woman who watched Margot Chen die and never told anyone? I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. My throat had closed up. My tongue had gone dead in my mouth, and all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Margot Chen. I'd tried so hard to forget her face, the way she'd looked at me in those final moments, begging for help I couldn't give, the weight of her hand going slack in mine, the sound of her last breath, rattling and wet and unbearable. I see. The man nodded slowly, reading my silence like a confession. That answers my question. He reached into his jacket. I flinched, expecting a weapon, expecting violence, expecting the moment I'd been dreading for 8 years to finally arrive. Instead, he pulled out a business card. My name is Alan Mercer. I work for a private firm that specializes in locating missing persons and gathering information for legal proceedings. He held out the card, waited for me to take it. The Chen family doesn't want to hurt you, Vanessa. They just want to know what happened to their daughter. They want closure. I didn't take the card. And if I can't give them that, then my firm will continue its investigation through other channels. We'll subpoena your medical records, your employment history, your financial documents. We'll find every trace of the woman you used to be before you became Vanessa Sullivan. His voice hardened. And eventually, we'll find the truth anyway. The only question is whether you tell it willingly, or whether it gets dragged out of you. He set the card on the floor at my feet, stepped back. The pleasant smile returned, like a mask being put back in place. You have 1 week to contact me. After that, the offer of cooperation expires, and things become significantly less pleasant. He turned, walked toward the stairwell, paused at the door. Sleep well, Vanessa, if that's even your real name. He was gone before I could respond. I stood in that hallway for a long time, staring at the business card on the floor, feeling the past I'd buried so carefully beginning to claw its way back to the surface. Margot Chen, 8 years of running, and she'd finally caught up to me. The only question now was what I was going to do about it. I didn't sleep that night, sat on my couch with all the lights on, turning Alan Mercer's business card over in my hands, remembering everything I'd spent 8 years trying to forget. Margot Chen and I had been friends. Not close. We'd worked together at a restaurant in Oakland, bonded over shared complaints about management and the customers who thought a 20% tip was excessive. She was 22, bright and ambitious, saving money for nursing school. I was 25, directionless, working jobs I didn't care about while I figured out what I wanted from life. The night she died, we'd gone to a party together. Someone she knew from her apartment complex. A gathering that was supposed to be small, but had grown into something larger by the time we arrived. Too many people in too small a space. Too much alcohol. Too much of everything. I'd lost track of her around midnight. Found her again an hour later, in a bedroom at the back of the apartment, with a man I didn't recognize. She was unconscious. He was doing things that made my stomach turn even now, 8 years later, sitting in a different city under a different name. I should have screamed. Should have called the police. Should have done any of the things that normal people do when they witness something unthinkable. Instead, I froze. Stood in that doorway, paralyzed by fear and shock and something else, something cowardly that I'd never been able to name. The man looked up, saw me watching, and smiled. The same kind of pleasant, unthreatening smile that Alan Mercer wore. The smile of a predator who knows he won't face consequences. He told me to leave, to forget what I'd seen, to understand that some people were protected in ways I couldn't imagine. And I listened. I walked out of that apartment, went home, told myself that Margot would be fine, that she'd wake up, that she'd forget, that the whole terrible night would fade into the blur of too many drinks and bad decisions. 3 days later, her body was found in a dumpster behind a grocery store. Cause of death, overdose. The police ruled it accidental. Case closed. But I knew it wasn't an overdose. I knew what had really happened in that bedroom, what had been done to her, what I'd witnessed and done nothing to stop. I knew, and I stayed silent, because the man who'd smiled at me had connections. Because people who asked too many questions about his activities had a way of disappearing. Because I was 25 and scared and nowhere near brave enough to tell the truth. I ran instead, changed my name, moved across the country, rebuilt myself from the ground up. Became Vanessa Sullivan, ER nurse, someone who saved lives instead of watching them end, someone who would never freeze in a doorway again. But Margot Chen had followed me anyway. 8 years, and her death was still reaching out from the past, demanding the answers I'd been too cowardly to give. I looked at Alan Mercer's card. The choice seemed simple enough. Tell the truth, or have the truth dragged out of me. Cooperate with the Chen family's investigation, or watch as Mercer and his firm dismantled everything I'd built. But it wasn't that simple. The man from that night, I'd looked him up years ago when the guilt had gotten too heavy to carry alone. His name was Victor Ashland. Old money, political connections, the kind of family that had been shaping city policy since before I was born. He'd gone on to get married, have children, build a reputation as a philanthropist and community leader. His face appeared in newspapers for all the right reasons. If I told the Chen family what I'd seen, it wouldn't stop with closure. They'd want justice. They'd pursue Ashland, try to prove what he'd done, and he would crush them the way he crushed everyone who challenged him, the way he'd crush me the moment I became a threat. The week passed slowly. I went to work, came home, checked every shadow for Alan Mercer's patient silhouette. He didn't appear. No calls, no messages, no sign that he was watching. Just the weight of the deadline pressing closer, the sense of walls narrowing around me. On the 5th day, I made a decision. I called the number on the card. Mercer answered on the 2nd ring, his voice as pleasant as his smile. "I was hoping you'd reach out," he said. "Does this mean you're ready to cooperate?" I'll tell you what I know, but not over the phone, and not with the Chen family present. They'll want to hear it directly. Then they'll have to wait. I need to know what happens after I talk, what protections I'll have, what guarantees. A pause. When Mercer spoke again, his tone had shifted, more businesslike, less predatory. That's reasonable. Where would you like to meet? I gave him the address of a coffee shop 3 blocks from the police station. Public, visible, close to help if I needed it. He agreed without hesitation. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. I'll be there. I hung up before he could say anything else. My hands were shaking, but something had settled in my chest. After 8 years of running, I was finally going to face what I'd done, what I hadn't done, the woman I'd left to die because I was too afraid to scream. That night, I dreamed of Margot Chen for the first time in years. She was standing in my apartment, looking at me with eyes that held no accusation, just sadness, just the quiet grief of someone who'd been forgotten. "I'm sorry," I told her. "I'm so sorry." She didn't answer, just stood there, watching, waiting. I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of my front door opening, not the hallway door, the door to my apartment, the one with 3 locks, a chain, and a deadbolt. I checked every night before bed. Someone was inside. I grabbed my phone, pressed myself against the headboard, and listened as footsteps crossed my living room. Slow, patient. The same deliberate rhythm I'd heard in the hallway outside my door. But this wasn't Alan Mercer. The footsteps were different. Heavier, more confident, belonging to someone who didn't need to pretend anymore. A figure appeared in my bedroom doorway. Broad shoulders, expensive suit, a face I'd spent 8 years trying to forget. Victor Ashland smiled at me. "Hello, witness," he said. "I hear you've been thinking about talking." 8 years hadn't changed him much. A little more gray at the temples, a few more lines around the eyes, but the same face, the same smile, the same absolute certainty that he could do whatever he wanted and no one would stop him. "How did you get in here?" "Locks are only as good as the people who install them." He stepped into the room, casual, unhurried, like he was entering his own home. "You've done well for yourself, I'll admit. New name, new career, new city. Most people I've had to deal with don't last half as long, but you always were smarter than you looked." My phone was in my hand. I pressed the emergency button, felt it vibrate with the silent call to 911. Just had to keep him talking, just had to buy enough time. The Chen family hired someone to find me. I know, Alan Mercer, competent for what he is. I've been tracking his investigation for months. Ashland settled into the chair by my bedroom window, making himself comfortable. When he started getting close to you, I had to make a decision. Let him bring you in, let you tell your little story, and spend the next few years dealing with lawyers and bad press, or take care of the problem myself. The way you took care of Margot? His expression didn't change. Margot was unfortunate. She shouldn't have been at that party, shouldn't have had so much to drink, shouldn't have wandered into a room with a man she didn't know. Bad decisions have consequences. You killed her. I cleaned up a mess. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, that smile sharpening into something colder. Do you know what would have happened if she'd woken up? If she'd remembered what I did, gone to the police, made accusations? My father would have handled it. He always did. But it would have been inconvenient. Expensive. So I made sure there was nothing to remember, nothing to accuse anyone of. He said it so casually, like he was describing a business transaction, a minor problem that required a minor solution. 22 years old, bright and ambitious, and he'd ended her life because it was less inconvenient than facing consequences. The police will be here soon. Will they? He glanced at my phone, still clutched in my hand. That silent call you made 2 minutes ago, It's not going through. I have equipment in my car that blocks cell signals within a 50-foot radius. Very useful for private conversations. The phone screen confirmed it. No signal, no connection, no help coming. So, what now? My voice was steady, but my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. You kill me too? Make it look like an accident, the way you did with her? That's one option. He stood, moved closer to the bed. I pressed back against the headboard, but there was nowhere to go. But I'd rather not. Bodies create paperwork, investigations, questions I'd prefer not to answer. I'm hoping we can reach an understanding instead. What kind of understanding? You don't talk to Mercer. You don't talk to the Chen family. You continue living your quiet little life, and I continue living mine. He was at the edge of the bed now, close enough that I could smell his cologne, the same expensive scent I remembered from that night, the smell of money and power and absolute impunity. In exchange, I let you keep living it. And if I refuse, then this conversation ends differently. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a small vial of clear liquid. Fentanyl, 50 times stronger than heroin. A drop or two and you simply stop. Very peaceful, very quick, very consistent with the overdose statistics in this neighborhood. I stared at the vial, at his hand, steady and confident, at the face of a man who'd done this before and would do it again without losing a moment's sleep. And something shifted inside me. I'd spent 8 years running from this moment, 8 years being the woman who froze in doorways, who stayed silent, who let terrible things happen because she was too afraid to act. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I'd become someone who ran toward crisis instead of away from it, someone who held people's lives in her hands every night and refused to let them go. I wasn't going to freeze again. "Okay," I said. "You win." Ashland's smile widened. "I knew you'd be reasonable." He leaned forward to say something else, and I drove my knee into his groin with every ounce of strength I had. He doubled over, gasping. The vial dropped from his hand, rolled across the floor. I was off the bed in an instant, grabbing the lamp from my nightstand and swinging it at his head. The base connected with his temple, and he went down hard, crashing against my dresser. I didn't stop, grabbed my phone, sprinted for the front door, fumbled with locks that suddenly seemed impossible to open. Behind me, I heard him getting up, heard the raw fury in his voice as he screamed something I didn't process. The door opened. I was in the hallway, running for the stairs, bare feet slapping against carpet. His footsteps thundered behind me, closer, faster, the sound of a predator who'd never had to chase anyone before. I hit the stairwell door, took the steps 3 at a time, burst into the lobby just as the night security guard looked up from his desk. "Call 911, I screamed. "There's a man. He's trying to kill me." Ashland emerged from the stairwell. He'd composed himself, smoothed his hair, fixed his expression into something confused and concerned. "Officer, this woman is having some kind of episode. She attacked me in her apartment. I was just trying to help. He broke into my home. He has drugs, fentanyl. He was going to..." "She's clearly disturbed. I'm a concerned neighbor, nothing more." The security guard looked between us, uncertain, reaching for his radio. And I saw it happening. Saw Ashland's money and polish and practiced charm starting to work. Saw the guard's confusion tilting toward the well-dressed man instead of the wild-eyed woman in pajamas. Then the lobby doors burst open. Alan Mercer walked in, flanked by 2 police officers and a woman I didn't recognize. His pleasant smile was gone, replaced by something harder and more satisfied. "Victor Ashland," he said. "These officers have some questions about the death of Margot Chen, and about the equipment in your car that's been blocking emergency calls for the past 15 minutes. Ashland's face went pale. For the first time, that mask of confidence cracked, showing the scared animal underneath. "You can't. My family. You have no idea who you're..." "I know exactly who you are." Mercer stepped aside, and the woman behind him moved forward, middle-aged, elegant, with eyes that held 8 years of grief and rage. And so does she. Mrs. Chen looked at the man who'd killed her daughter, and she smiled. "Hello, Victor," she said. "I've been waiting a very long time to meet you." Victor Ashland was arrested that night. The fentanyl vial was recovered from my bedroom floor. The signal-blocking equipment was found in his car, along with a burner phone containing messages that tied him to 3 other unsolved deaths over the past decade. His lawyers descended within hours, but even money and connections couldn't make the evidence disappear. Not this time, not with the Chen family's resources pushing back, matching his influence dollar for dollar. I gave my statement to the police, told them everything, the party, the bedroom, what I'd seen him do to Margot, what I'd done afterward, which was nothing. The silence I'd kept for 8 years, while her killer built a life of charity galas and newspaper profiles. The detective who took my statement didn't judge me, at least not outwardly. But I saw something in his eyes when I described walking away, when I admitted that I'd chosen my own safety over her justice. Something that looked a lot like how I'd felt every time I looked in the mirror since that night. "You're coming forward now," he said finally. "That counts for something." I wasn't sure it did, but I nodded anyway. The trial took 14 months. Ashland's defense threw everything they had at discrediting me. My name change, my flight from California, the years of silence that made my testimony convenient rather than credible. They painted me as an opportunist, a liar, someone seeking attention or money or revenge for imagined slights. But Mrs. Chen had been thorough. Alan Mercer had spent years building a case, finding other witnesses, tracing patterns of behavior that stretched back to Ashland's college days. I wasn't the only one who'd seen something. I was just the first one willing to say it out loud. Victor Ashland was convicted of second-degree murder and 3 counts of manslaughter. The judge sentenced him to 45 years. His family's money couldn't buy his way out of a cell, couldn't silence the voices that had finally found the courage to speak. I watched him led away in handcuffs, watched his expression shift from disbelief to rage to something emptier. The look of a man who'd spent his whole life believing consequences were for other people, finally learning he was wrong. It should have felt like victory, like closure, the way Mrs. Chen had said she wanted. But all I felt was tired, hollowed out, like the weight I'd been carrying for 8 years had finally lifted, and without it, I didn't know how to stand. Mrs. Chen found me outside the courthouse after the sentencing. I'd been avoiding her throughout the trial, unable to face the woman whose daughter I'd failed to save. But she crossed the plaza with purpose, stopped directly in front of me, and took my hands in hers. "Thank you," she said. I shook my head. "I don't deserve." "You were 25 years old, alone, afraid, facing something no one should have to face." Her grip tightened, firm and warm. "You made a choice I wish you hadn't made, but you also made a choice last year, when you decided to stop running, when you fought back, when you told the truth, even knowing what it would cost you. It doesn't change what I did." "No, it doesn't." Her eyes were bright with tears, but her voice was steady. "Margot is still gone. Nothing will ever change that. But because of you, the man who killed her will spend the rest of his life paying for it. Because of you, other families won't have to wonder what happened to their daughters." She released my hands, stepped back. "That matters, Vanessa. It may not feel like enough, but it matters." I wanted to believe her, wanted to accept the forgiveness she was offering, the absolution I'd been seeking since the night I walked out of that apartment and left her daughter behind. But some wounds don't heal that cleanly. Some guilt doesn't wash away with convictions and sentences and justice served. I'd carried Margot Chen with me for 8 years, and I knew I'd carry her for the rest of my life. Not as punishment, or not just as punishment, but as a reminder of who I'd been. of who I'd chosen to become instead. I went back to work, back to the ER, where crisis was constant and there was never time to freeze in doorways. I threw myself into the job with a focus I hadn't felt in years, holding on to patients who were slipping away, fighting for every life that came through those doors. I couldn't save Margot, but I could save others. Every shift, every night, I could make a different choice. Alan Mercer visited me once, a few months after the trial ended. He looked different without the predatory edge, older, more tired, almost human. He sat in my living room and drank the coffee I offered and told me something I hadn't expected. "I've been doing this work for 20 years, he said. Finding people who don't want to be found, dragging secrets into the light. Most of the time, it's ugly, painful. The truth usually is." He set down his cup. "But sometimes it leads somewhere good. Sometimes the person I'm tracking down turns out to be exactly what a case needs, exactly what a family needs." He met my eyes. "You were worth finding, Vanessa. Whatever you think of yourself, you were worth it." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded, and he left, and I sat alone in my apartment as the evening light faded through the windows. If you're reading this, I want you to understand something. We all have moments when we freeze. When fear takes over, when the right choice feels impossible, when we walk away from something we should have faced. Those moments don't define us, not entirely. What defines us is what we do afterward, whether we keep running or whether we eventually turn around. I ran for 8 years, hid behind a new name, a new life, a wall of silence that I thought would keep me safe. But the past doesn't stay buried. The people we've failed don't stay forgotten. Eventually, something comes knocking. A stranger in a hallway, a name we thought we'd never hear again. A reckoning we've been avoiding since the moment we made the wrong choice. When that happens, you have a decision to make. Keep running or stand your ground. Stay silent or finally speak. I know which choice I made. I know what it cost me and what it gave me in return. The question is, when your moment comes, what will you choose? I still work late shifts. Still walk home through empty parking lots, past shadows that seem deeper than they should be. Sometimes I see figures standing near my building, waiting for something, and my heart stutters the way it did that first night. But I don't freeze anymore. Don't turn away. Don't pretend I didn't notice. Don't let fear make my choices for me. I walk toward them instead. Face whatever's waiting. Deal with it head on, the way I should have dealt with everything from the beginning. Because I learned something in that hallway, facing down a man who thought he could silence me the way he'd silenced Margot Chen. The only thing worse than being followed is being the person who runs forever. And I'm done running. Story 4, The Warehouse Door That Knocked from the Inside. The first knock came at 2:17 a.m. I was making my rounds, the same route I'd walked 6 nights a week for almost 3 years, flashlight in one hand, radio in the other. The Meriden Industrial Complex covered 12 acres of concrete and corrugated steel, a maze of warehouses and loading docks that had been slowly dying since the manufacturing jobs moved overseas. Most of the buildings were empty now, leased to companies that used them for storage and nothing else. My job was to make sure nobody broke in, nobody started fires, nobody turned the place into a shelter or a drug den or whatever else happened to abandoned spaces when no one was watching. It wasn't exciting work, but after 20 years in the Army and a divorce that left me with nothing but a pickup truck and a storage unit full of regrets, I wasn't looking for excitement. I was looking for quiet, for routine, for nights that passed without incident and paychecks that cleared without drama. The knock changed everything. I was passing Warehouse 7 when I heard it. 3 sharp raps against metal coming from inside the building. Not the random settling sounds that old structures make. Not the skittering of rats or the wind catching a loose panel. This was deliberate, rhythmic. The knock of someone trying to get attention. I stopped, listened. The complex was silent except for the distant hum of the highway and the whisper of wind through chain-link fencing. 3 more knocks, same rhythm, same spot. The large rolling door on the east side of Warehouse 7, the one that hadn't been opened in over a year. My name is Earl Dawson. I'm 54 years old, and I've seen enough strange things to know the difference between imagination and reality. This was real. Someone or something was inside that warehouse, knocking on a door that was padlocked from the outside. I keyed my radio. Control, this is Dawson. I'm at Warehouse 7. Hearing sounds from inside, requesting backup. Static. Then, copy, Dawson. What kind of sounds? Knocking. From the interior. 3 raps. Repeated. A pause. Warehouse 7 has been sealed since March. No authorized access. I'm aware. That's why I'm calling it in. Sit tight. Ramirez is on the other side of the complex. ETA 15 minutes. 15 minutes. I looked at the warehouse. 60,000 square feet of darkness. One door rattling with knocks that shouldn't exist. The smart thing would be to wait. Stay outside, maintain distance, let backup arrive before investigating. But the knocking was getting louder, more insistent. And underneath it, I heard something else. Something that sounded almost like a voice, muffled by metal and distance, forming words I couldn't quite understand. I approached the door. The padlock was intact, heavy-duty, industrial grade, exactly where I'd last seen it during my inspection 3 weeks ago. No signs of tampering, no cuts in the metal, no indication that anyone had opened this door in months. But the knocking continued, vibrating through the steel, and the voice underneath was clearer now. Please. Help. Can't. Someone was trapped inside. That was the only explanation that made sense. Someone had gotten in through another entrance, gotten locked in somehow, been stuck in there for God knows how long. The voice sounded weak, desperate, the voice of someone at the end of their strength. I had bolt cutters in my truck, could have the padlock off in 30 seconds, but something made me hesitate. Something about the way the knocking had started exactly as I passed by, not before, not after, but precisely when I was close enough to hear. Something about the voice, which was clearer now, but still wrong somehow. The cadence off, the words too evenly spaced. Please, help, can't, get out. I stepped back from the door. The knocking stopped immediately. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. The kind that presses against your ears like a physical weight. Even the wind had died down. Even the highway had gone quiet, like the whole world was holding its breath. Then, from inside the warehouse, a new sound. Not knocking this time. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps moving away from the door, deeper into the building, getting fainter, getting quieter, then stopping. I stood there, flashlight pointed at a door that had gone still, waiting for something I couldn't name. 30 seconds passed. A minute. The silence stretched tight enough to snap. My radio crackled. Dawson, Ramirez is en route. You still at Warehouse 7? Copy. Still here. Status? I looked at the door. At the padlock that hadn't been touched. At the darkness visible through the gap at the bottom where no light had shone for almost a year. Sounds have stopped, but something's in there. Something that knew I was listening. Another pause. When control came back, the operator's voice was different, more careful. Dawson, do not attempt entry. Repeat, do not attempt entry. Wait for Ramirez. Understood. I didn't move from my position, didn't take my eyes off that door, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something on the other side was doing the same thing, standing in the darkness, waiting, watching. Ramirez arrived 12 minutes later, out of breath and skeptical. Knocking? From inside a sealed warehouse? That's what I heard. You sure it wasn't just 3 knocks, sharp, rhythmic, unmistakable, coming from directly behind the door we were both staring at? Ramirez went pale. His hand moved to his flashlight, then to the radio, then back to his flashlight like he couldn't decide which tool would help. Jesus, he whispered. What the hell is that? I didn't have an answer, but the voice came again, clearer than before, and this time we both heard the words. Let me out. I've been waiting so long. Ramirez looked at me. I looked at him, and we both understood, without saying it, that whatever was behind that door wasn't a person who'd gotten trapped. It was something that wanted us to think it was, and it had been waiting in there, patient and silent, for someone to finally hear it knock. We didn't open the door that night, called it in, filed reports, let the day shift, supervisors deal with the aftermath. They sent a team to inspect Warehouse 7 the next morning. 4 guys with flashlights and clipboards, treating the whole thing like a routine check. I watched from across the lot as they cut the padlock, rolled up the door, and walked into 60,000 square feet of darkness. They found nothing. Empty shelves, dust, the scattered remnants of whatever company had last used the space. No sign of habitation, no evidence of intrusion, no explanation for the knocking or the voice. Just an empty warehouse that had been empty for months. Pipes, the supervisor told me when I came in for my next shift. Old buildings make noise. You've been doing this long enough to know that. Pipes don't ask to be let out. He gave me the look that managers give employees who are becoming problems. Maybe you misheard. It was late. You were tired. These things happen. They didn't happen to me. 20 years in the Army had trained me to know the difference between ambient noise and a human voice, between random sounds and deliberate patterns. But I nodded, took my assignment, and didn't push the issue. Ramirez wasn't as diplomatic. He quit 3 days later, walked off the job in the middle of his shift, left his badge on the guard station desk, and never came back. I tried calling him once, got a voicemail that was never returned. Whatever he'd heard that night, it had rattled him badly enough to walk away from a paycheck he needed. I should have done the same. But I had questions, and the only way to answer them was to keep working, keep walking my rounds, keep passing Warehouse 7 and listening for sounds that shouldn't exist. The knocking came back on the 4th night. Same time, 2:17 a.m., like something was keeping a schedule. Same rhythm, 3 sharp raps against the rolling door, followed by silence, followed by 3 more. I stood at my usual distance and listened, flashlight off, radio muted, giving whatever was inside my full attention. You came back. The voice was different this time, stronger, more coherent, less like someone mimicking human speech and more like someone remembering how it worked. I knew you would. I didn't respond, just stood there watching the door, feeling the weight of something watching me in return. The others didn't listen, but you do. Others. That word stuck in my head long after the knocking stopped, long after the footsteps retreated into the depths of the warehouse, long after I finished my rounds and drove home as dawn broke over the highway. What others? Who else had heard the knocking and chosen not to listen? The answers were in the archives. The Meriden Industrial Complex had been operating since 1957. 67 years of records, stored in filing cabinets in the administration building, accessible to anyone with a security clearance and enough patience to dig. I started with Warehouse 7, pulling every incident report, every maintenance log, every scrap of documentation I could find. The building had been used by a textile company until 1989, then a furniture manufacturer until 2003, then a series of short-term tenants who never stayed more than a year or 2. Standard industrial history, nothing unusual. but the security logs told a different story. 1992. Night guard reports unusual sounds from Warehouse 7. Investigation finds nothing. Guard resigns 2 weeks later. 1998. Maintenance worker refuses to enter Warehouse 7 alone, claims to have heard voices from the walls, transferred to different facility. 2007. Security patrol reports knocking from inside sealed warehouse. Investigation inconclusive. 2 guards quit within the month. 2015. Anonymous complaint filed about disturbances in Warehouse 7. Complaint dismissed due to lack of evidence. The pattern went back decades. Every few years, someone heard something. Every few years, an investigation found nothing. And every few years, the people who'd listened too closely found reasons to leave. I dug deeper, found a name that appeared in multiple reports. Harold Vance, night security supervisor from 1985 to 2001. He'd been the one to document most of the early incidents, the one who'd kept pushing for answers when everyone else wanted to forget. Harold Vance was still alive, 83 years old, living in a retirement community 40 minutes from the complex. I found his number in the old employee directory and called him that evening. "Warehouse 7, he said before I'd even finished explaining why I was calling. "You heard it, didn't you? The knocking?" "Yes, sir. I'm trying to understand." "There's nothing to understand. That building has been wrong since before I started working there. Since before the complex was built, if you believe the old stories." His voice was thin, trembling, the voice of a man who'd carried something heavy for too long. "You want my advice? Stop listening. Walk a different route. Pretend you never heard anything." "I can't do that." A long pause. I heard him breathing on the other end, heard the creak of a chair as he shifted his weight. "Then you need to know what's really in there," he said finally. "Not what they found when they opened the door. What's underneath it. What's been underneath it since 1952 when they poured the foundation." "What are you talking about?" "Come see me tomorrow. I'll show you the files I kept, the ones the company doesn't know exist." His voice dropped to a whisper. "But don't go back to that warehouse tonight. Whatever's in there, it's been waiting for someone like you, someone who listens, someone who doesn't walk away." "Waiting for what?" Harold Vance was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "Waiting for someone to finally let it out." The line went dead. I sat in my truck, phone in hand, staring at the Meriden industrial complex spread out before me in the fading light. Warehouse 7 was a dark shape on the eastern edge, its rolling door shut tight, its secrets locked behind concrete and steel. But even from this distance, I could feel it. Something was watching. Something was waiting. And tonight, for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to know what. Harold Vance lived in a small room at the Sycamore Gardens retirement community, surrounded by filing boxes that looked older than most of his neighbors. He was smaller than I'd expected, shrunken by age, hands trembling with the early stages of Parkinson's. But his eyes were sharp, alert. The eyes of a man who'd spent decades watching for something most people couldn't see. "Close the door," he said when I arrived. "What I'm about to show you isn't public knowledge. Never has been." He pulled a box from under his bed, the cardboard soft with age, and set it on the table between us. Inside were photographs, documents, newspaper clippings, the accumulated evidence of a lifetime spent chasing answers that nobody wanted to find. "The Meriden Industrial Complex was built on a burial ground," he said. "Not Native American, older than that. The archaeological survey in 1951 found remains that didn't match any known culture, bones that were shaped wrong, artifacts that shouldn't have existed." He spread photographs across the table, black and white images of an excavation site, workers standing around a pit that seemed to go down forever, and at the bottom, barely visible in the grainy resolution, shapes that made my stomach turn. The company buried the findings, literally, poured concrete over the whole site, built Warehouse 7 directly on top of it. Harold's voice was bitter. They knew something was down there. They just didn't care, as long as it stayed buried. What was down there? Nobody knows for certain. The archaeologists who worked the dig, 3 of them died within a year. Accidents, supposedly. The 4th went mad, spent his last decade in an institution, drawing the same symbol over and over until his hands bled. Harold pulled out another photograph, a crude sketch, repeated hundreds of times across a yellowed page. A circle with something coiled inside it, something that looked almost like a figure but wrong, folded in on itself in ways that geometry shouldn't allow. He called it the sleeper, Harold continued. Said it had been down there for thousands of years, waiting for the right conditions to wake up. Said the concrete wouldn't hold it forever. Said eventually, someone would hear it calling an answer. I thought about the knocking, the voice that had grown clearer each time I listened, the way it had said you came back like it had been expecting me specifically. The incidents I found in the archives, the guards who heard things, the workers who quit. All people who listened too long. The sleeper reaches out, tests the waters, sees who responds. Harold's hands were shaking worse now, rattling the photographs on the table. Most people ignore it, tell themselves it's pipes, or wind, or their imagination. But some people can't ignore it. Some people hear it too clearly. People like me. People like you, like me, 40 years ago. He met my eyes, and I saw something there I recognized. The same exhaustion I felt every morning, the same weight that had been growing heavier since the first night I heard the knocking. I listened for 16 years, documented everything, tried to warn people, tried to get someone to take it seriously. Nobody did. And eventually, I realized the truth, which is, the sleeper doesn't just want to be heard, it wants to be released. And every time someone listens, every time someone acknowledges its existence, it gets a little stronger, a little closer to waking up. He closed his eyes. I stopped listening in 2001, walked away, took my files, never went back. The knocking stopped, for me at least. But I always knew it would find someone else eventually. I sat with that for a long moment. The implications were clear enough. Every time I'd stood outside that door, every time I'd let the voice reach me, I'd been feeding something ancient and patient and hungry. How do I make it stop? You don't. Harold opened his eyes, and they were wet with tears. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Once it has your attention, it doesn't let go. You can walk away like I did, but it'll keep calling, keep waiting, and eventually... He broke off, shaking his head. Eventually what? Eventually someone will answer. Someone will open that door, go down into whatever's underneath, and give the sleeper what it wants. His voice dropped to a whisper. I've spent 40 years terrified that person would be me, that I'd wake up one night and find myself walking toward Warehouse 7, unable to stop, unable to resist. It's why I never moved away. I figured if I stayed close, I could watch, could intervene if it came to that. But you're 83. You can't. No, I can't. He reached out, gripped my wrist with surprising strength. But you can. You're young enough, strong enough, stubborn enough. If anyone's going to end this, it has to be you. End it how? You just said it can't be stopped. I said listening can't be stopped, but there might be another way. He released my wrist, dug deeper into the box, and pulled out a folder marked with faded red ink, Containment Protocols. The archaeologists weren't the only ones who studied the site. The company hired consultants, people who specialized in things that shouldn't exist. They developed procedures, fail-safes, ways to reinforce the barrier if it ever started to weaken. I took the folder. Inside were pages of dense text, diagrams I couldn't interpret, symbols that matched the ones the mad archaeologist had drawn. At the very back was a map, the layout of Warehouse 7 with a section of floor marked in red. "That's where the original burial site is," Harold said. "Directly beneath the northwest corner. The concrete is thinnest there. They ran out of materials, cut corners, did exactly what you'd expect from a company that cared more about deadlines than safety." "And the containment protocols?" "Require someone to go inside, to reinforce the barrier from within." He held my gaze. "It's dangerous. The sleeper will know you're there. It'll try to stop you, or worse, convince you to help it instead. But if the protocols work, if you can strengthen the seal before it breaks through..." The knocking stops. The knocking stops. The voice stops. Everything goes quiet, maybe for another 50 years, maybe forever. Harold slumped back in his chair, exhausted by the conversation. I was supposed to do it. That was the plan, back in 2001. But I was a coward. I walked away instead. I looked at the folder in my hands, at the map, the symbols, the weight of everything Harold had carried for 4 decades. "You weren't a coward," I said. "You survived. That counts for something." He didn't respond, just sat there, eyes closed, breathing shallow, like a man who'd finally set down a burden he'd been carrying too long. I left him there with his boxes and his memories, drove back toward the complex with the folder on my passenger seat, the containment protocols, the map marked in red. Tonight, I was going inside Warehouse 7, and whatever was waiting beneath the floor was going to learn that some people don't just listen, some people fight back. I waited until midnight to make my move. The complex was quiet, the other guards assigned to different sectors, nobody scheduled to pass Warehouse 7 until morning. I'd memorized the containment protocols during the drive back, a series of symbols to be drawn at specific points, words to be spoken in a language that predated English by millennia, a sequence that had to be performed exactly or not at all. The folder also contained a warning, underlined 3 times in faded red ink. "Do not engage with the entity. Do not respond to its voice. Do not deviate from the protocol under any circumstances." I cut the padlock at 12:15. The metal fell away, and the rolling door groaned as I pushed it open, revealing darkness so complete it seemed to swallow my flashlight beam. The air inside was cold, far colder than it should have been in July, and carried a smell I couldn't identify. Something organic, something old. I stepped inside. The warehouse was exactly as the inspection team had described. Empty shelves, dust, the scattered debris of decades of neglect. But there was something else, too. Something I felt rather than saw. A pressure in the air, a weight against my chest, the unmistakable sensation of being watched by something that had been waiting a very long time. The knocking started before I'd taken 10 steps. Not from the door this time. From below, from the concrete floor itself, vibrating with impacts that seemed to come from deep underground. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. The same rhythm I'd heard outside, but louder now. Closer. "You came inside." The voice rose from everywhere at once. The walls, the ceiling, the floor beneath my feet. It was stronger than I'd ever heard it, almost fully formed, almost human. Almost. "I knew you would eventually." I didn't respond. Kept walking, eyes on the map, heading for the northwest corner where the containment symbols needed to be drawn. The protocols were clear. Complete the sequence, speak the words, reinforce the barrier. Everything else was noise. "You're different than the others." The floor was getting warmer as I walked. The cold that had greeted me at the entrance was gone, replaced by a heat that radiated up through my boots, through my legs, settling in my bones like a fever. The northwest corner was 50 feet away, 40, 30. They all ran, but you keep coming closer. 20 feet, The heat was almost unbearable now, sweat dripping down my face, my hands slick on the flashlight. I could see the spot marked on the map, a section of floor that looked no different from the rest, but felt wrong somehow, alive. Do you want to know what I am? I knelt on the concrete, pulled out the chalk Harold had included in the folder. Special composition, he'd said, made from materials I didn't want to think about, and began drawing the first symbol. A circle, then the coiled figure inside, the same shape the mad archaeologist had repeated until his hands bled. The floor shuddered. Stop. The voice wasn't fragmented anymore. It was whole, complete, thundering through the warehouse with a force that knocked dust from the rafters. I felt it in my skull, behind my eyes, vibrating in a frequency that made my vision blur. I kept drawing. You don't understand what you're doing. Second symbol, third. The chalk moved across concrete that was now hot enough to burn, leaving white lines that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. The protocols required 7 symbols total, arranged in a specific pattern, each one building on the last. I can give you everything. Power, knowledge, the answers to questions you haven't even asked. Fourth symbol, fifth. The floor was cracking now, thin lines spreading out from where I knelt, and through the cracks I saw something. Light, but not light. A glow that was the wrong color, that moved in ways light shouldn't move, that came from somewhere impossibly far below. I've been sleeping for so long, waiting for someone like you, someone who listens, someone who understands. Sixth symbol. My hand was shaking, the chalk wearing down to a nub, the heat so intense I could smell my own skin beginning to burn. One more, and then the words, and then it would be over. Let me show you. The floor gave way. Not completely, just a section, right beside me, concrete crumbling into a hole that hadn't existed seconds before. And from that hole, something reached up. A hand, but not a hand. Fingers too long, joints in the wrong places, skin that looked like it had been buried in the earth for centuries. It grabbed my wrist with strength that made my bones creak. See. Images flooded my mind. The burial ground before the concrete, before the complex, before anything human had touched this land. The thing that had been laid to rest here, not dead, never dead, just sleeping, bound by rituals that had eroded over millennia. The centuries of waiting, of reaching out, of calling to anyone who might hear. The hunger that had grown and grown and grown until it was all that remained. And beneath all of it, a need so vast and terrible that it made my own existence feel like a candle flame in a hurricane. I screamed, yanked my hand free, felt something tear as the grip released. The chalk was gone, fallen into the hole, lost in the darkness below. The 7th symbol was unfinished, the sequence incomplete. But the words, I still had the words. I spoke them, syllables that felt wrong in my mouth, sounds that human vocal cords weren't designed to make. The temperature plummeted. The light from below flickered, dimmed, went dark. The hand retreated into the hole, fingers scrabbling at the edges, trying to hold on. No, not again. I was so close. The cracks in the floor began to seal, concrete flowing like liquid, filling the gaps, covering the hole, burying the reaching hand beneath it. The voice fragmented, broke apart, became the scattered knocking I'd heard that first night. You'll come back. They always come back. Then silence. I lay on the floor of Warehouse 7, staring at the ceiling, listening to my own ragged breathing. My wrist was bleeding where the hand had grabbed me, 5 parallel cuts that looked like they'd been made with something sharper than fingers. The 7th symbol was incomplete, a broken circle that glowed faintly and then faded. It wasn't perfect. The containment wasn't as strong as it should have been, wasn't the permanent solution Harold had hoped for. But it was enough, for now. I pulled myself to my feet, walked back toward the entrance on legs that barely supported me. The warehouse was quiet, truly quiet, for the first time since I'd started hearing the knocking. Outside, dawn was breaking. Orange light spilled across the complex, painting the concrete and steel in colors that felt like hope. I sealed the door behind me, put a new padlock in place, and made a promise to myself that I would never, ever come back. But even as I made it, I knew it was a lie. The sleeper was right about one thing. They always come back. I visited Harold 3 days later. He was sitting in the same chair, surrounded by the same boxes, but something had changed. The weight I'd seen pressing down on him was lighter now. His hands still trembled. His body still bore the marks of age and illness, but his eyes had a clarity I hadn't noticed before. "You did it," he said. Not a question. I felt it happen. Woke up in the middle of the night, and for the first time in 40 years, the pressure was gone. That constant hum in the back of my head, the sense that something was always watching. He shook his head slowly. "You actually did it." Not completely. I showed him the wounds on my wrist, 5 parallel scars now, healed but permanent. The 7th symbol wasn't finished. The chalk fell into the hole before I could complete it. Harold was quiet for a long moment. "Then it's not over." "No, the containment is weaker than it should be, years instead of decades, maybe less." "How much less?" I didn't have an answer. The protocols hadn't included a troubleshooting section for incomplete rituals. All I knew was that the knocking had stopped, the voice had gone silent, and Warehouse 7 felt empty in a way it hadn't before. But empty wasn't the same as safe. Quiet wasn't the same as gone. "You'll have to go back," Harold said. "Eventually, to finish what you started." "I know. And if the containment fails before you're ready, then I'll deal with it." The words came out harder than I intended. I've spent my whole life waiting for something to matter, waiting for a reason to stay awake, to keep moving, to give a damn about what happens next. Now, I have one. Harold studied me with those sharp, tired eyes. "That's what it does, you know. The sleeper. It gives you purpose, makes you feel necessary, important, connected to something larger than yourself." He paused. "That's how it keeps you coming back." I thought about the voice in the warehouse, the images it had forced into my mind, centuries of waiting, of hunger, of reaching out across the void for anyone who might listen. It hadn't just been trying to escape. It had been trying to connect, to find someone who understood what it felt like to be buried and forgotten and alone. "Maybe that's not entirely a bad thing," I said. "Maybe not." Harold leaned back, eyes drifting toward the window. "But be careful. The line between guardian and prisoner is thinner than you think. I spent 16 years watching that warehouse, telling myself I was protecting people, keeping the world safe. But the truth is, I couldn't have walked away even if I'd wanted to. It had its hooks in me too deep." "Is that why you stayed close? All these years?" "Part of it." He smiled, thin and tired. "The other part is that someone had to keep the records. Someone had to remember what was down there, in case the containment failed and the next poor bastard needed to know what they were dealing with." He gestured at the boxes around him. "Now that's your job, too." I took the boxes when I left. All of them. The photographs, the documents, the containment protocols, the decades of research that Harold Vance had accumulated in his quiet war against something that shouldn't exist. He watched me load them into my truck, standing in the doorway of the retirement home like a man seeing his life's work finally pass into capable hands. "One more thing," he called out as I was about to drive away. "The sleeper spoke to you, showed you things. That means part of it is inside you now, a connection that goes both ways." His voice dropped. "If you ever start hearing the knocking again, not from the warehouse but from inside your own head, you need to finish the 7th symbol, immediately, before it's too late." I nodded, drove away, didn't look back. That was 6 months ago. I still work at the Meriden Industrial Complex, still walk my rounds, still check the doors, still pass warehouse 7-6 nights a week. The building has been quiet since that night. No knocking, no voices, no sense of something watching from the other side of the wall. The new padlock stays locked. The concrete stays solid. The sleeper stays asleep. But Harold was right about the connection. Some nights, when the complex is silent and the moon is hidden behind clouds, I feel it. A tug in the back of my skull, a whisper at the edge of hearing, the faintest echo of a voice I'd hoped I'd never hear again. It doesn't say words, not yet, but I can sense the shape of them, the hunger behind them, the patience of something that's been waiting for millennia and can wait a little longer. I've started keeping Harold's files in a storage unit across town, made copies, stored them in different locations, created a trail that someone could follow if something happened to me. The containment protocols, the symbols, the words that need to be spoken, everything a person would need to do what I did, or to finish what I couldn't, because I know how this ends. Eventually, the incomplete seal will weaken. Eventually, the knocking will return, louder than before, impossible to ignore. Eventually, someone will have to go back into that warehouse and face whatever's waiting beneath the floor. I hope that person is me. I hope I'm still strong enough, still stubborn enough, still capable of fighting back when the time comes. But if I'm not, if the sleeper takes me before I can finish the job, then someone else will have to step up. Someone who hears the knocking and doesn't walk away. Someone who listens, really listens, and understands what that means. If you're reading this, I want you to pay attention. Not to the story I've told you, though that matters too. Pay attention to the sounds you dismiss as nothing, the feelings you explain away as imagination, the moments when you're certain something is watching, even though you're completely alone. Sometimes those moments are exactly what they seem, and sometimes, in the dead of night, in the places people have forgotten, there are doors that shouldn't be opened. Doors that knock from the inside. Doors that lead down to things that have been waiting since before your grandparents were born. If you ever find yourself standing in front of one of those doors, listening to the knocking, hearing a voice that asks to be let out, remember what I've told you. Remember that some things are buried for a reason. Remember that listening too long makes you part of the story, whether you want to be or not. And remember this, the sleeper isn't the only thing down there. Harold's files mention others, sites scattered across the country, maybe the world, places where the foundations were poured over secrets that should have stayed hidden forever. I've started looking into them, started making lists, drawing maps, planning trips I know I shouldn't take. The tug in my skull gets stronger every time I do, and I'm not sure anymore if I'm hunting the darkness or if it's hunting me. But that's a story for another time. For now, the door stays sealed. The knocking stays silent. And every night, when I walk past Warehouse 7, I pause for just a moment and listen. Not because I expect to hear anything, but because someone has to. Someone has to keep the watch. Someone has to make sure that when the knocking starts again, and it will, eventually, it always does, there's a person ready to answer. Not to let it out, to push it back down. That's the job now. That's my purpose. That's the thing that keeps me awake, keeps me walking these rounds, keeps me coming back night after night to a place most people would run from. The sleeper is patient, but so am I. And when it finally wakes up, I'll be waiting. Story 5. the whispering I heard from the basement vent. This happened about 2 years ago when I was 23. I just moved into my first solo rental house after ending a 4-year relationship with my boyfriend Kyle. We'd lived together for the last 2 of those years, and when things fell apart, I found myself starting completely over. No shared apartment, no shared furniture, no shared anything. Just me. The house I found was small, built sometime in the 70s, tucked into a quiet neighborhood on the east side of town. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, hardwood floors that creaked in all the usual places. The rent was cheap because the place needed work. Drafty windows, a kitchen that hadn't been updated since Reagan was president. That particular smell old houses have, like dust and decades and someone else's memories baked into the walls. I loved it immediately. The landlord was an older guy named Richard who lived out of state. I'd only met him once, at the lease signing, and after that, it was just emails and the occasional text. He seemed nice enough, if a little distant. Told me to call if anything broke, handed me the keys, and that was that. Those first few weeks, I spent every spare moment making the place mine. Hung pictures, arranged and rearranged furniture, bought plants I'd probably kill within a month. My cat Felix explored every corner while I assembled a second-hand bookshelf and pretended I knew what I was doing. For the first time since the breakup, I felt like I could breathe. I worked from home doing customer service for an insurance company, 8 hours a day with a headset on, answering the same questions, reading the same scripts, apologizing for things that weren't my fault. Not glamorous, but it paid the bills and meant I rarely had to leave the house. My setup was simple. Laptop on the kitchen table, coffee pot within arm's reach, Felix curled up on the chair beside me. The neighborhood was exactly what I needed. Quiet, mostly older couples and young families. The kind of place where people waved but didn't pry. Nobody knocked on my door asking questions. Nobody cared what time I went to bed or whether I'd showered that day. After years of living with someone else, of negotiating every small decision, the solitude felt like freedom. November came in cold and wet that year. I remember the rain especially. It seemed to fall every night, drumming against the roof, streaming down the windows. I'd lie in bed listening to it, the radiator clicking as it warmed up, the house settling around me with all its small familiar sounds. Old houses talk, my mom used to say. You just have to learn their language. I was learning. The basement was the one part of the house I hadn't really claimed. It was accessed through a door in the hallway between the kitchen and the living room. Just a plain white door with a simple hook latch that I never bothered to use. I'd been down there exactly twice. Once during the initial walkthrough with Richard, and once to store some boxes I hadn't gotten around to unpacking. It wasn't a pleasant space, unfinished, with a concrete floor and exposed ceiling, the kind of basement that exists purely for utility. The furnace squatted in one corner, old and hulking, connected to a web of ductwork that ran along the ceiling like metal veins. A single bare bulb hung in the center, and even with it on, the corners stayed dim. The smell was what got me most. That damp, musty basement smell, like wet stone and forgotten things. I had no reason to go down there. The furnace worked fine, the water heater did its job, and my boxes could wait forever for all I cared. So the basement stayed closed, out of sight, out of mind. Just another part of the house I didn't need to think about. The floor vents were a different story. They were everywhere. Old metal grates set into the hardwood, maybe 8 inches by 12, painted over so many times you could see the texture of it. One in the living room near the couch, one in the kitchen by the back door, one in my bedroom right next to my closet. I didn't think much about them at first. They were just vents, part of the heating system, connected to all that ductwork in the basement. Sometimes when the furnace kicked on, I'd feel the warm air rising through them, hear the soft rush of it moving through the house. Normal sounds. House sounds. By the end of my second month there, I'd settled into a rhythm. Work during the day, TV, or reading in the evenings, early to bed because mornings came fast. Felix had claimed the sunny spot by the living room window as his territory. I'd started cooking real meals again instead of surviving on takeout and cereal. The breakup still hurt sometimes, usually late at night when the house felt too quiet. But I was healing. I could feel it. I remember thinking, one night in mid-November, that I finally felt safe. Not just physically safe, but emotionally safe. Like I'd built something that was entirely mine, a life that didn't depend on anyone else. The rain was coming down hard that night, rattling the windows, and I lay in bed listening to it, feeling genuinely peaceful for the first time in months. That was the week I first heard the whispering coming from the vent in my bedroom. At first, I told myself it was just air moving through the ducts. It was almost 11 when I first heard it. I was lying in bed, rain tapping against the window, halfway between awake and asleep. That's when the sound drifted up through the vent near my closet, low, rhythmic, almost like murmuring. I sat up, heart suddenly loud in my ears, listened. Nothing. Just the rain, the radiator clicking, the house doing what old houses do. I told myself it was air moving through the ductwork. Sound travels strangely in old homes, bouncing through pipes and vents in ways that don't make sense. I'd read that somewhere. It made me feel better, so I held on to it. Sleep came eventually, though it took longer than usual. The next few days passed without incident. Work, calls, Felix, TV, sleep. The rhythm I'd built. I almost forgot about the sound entirely, filed it away under weird house noises, and moved on. I thought about mentioning it to someone, my mom, maybe, or my friend Sarah. But what would I even say? I heard a weird noise from my vent. They'd laugh, I'd laugh too. 4 nights later, it happened again. This time I was wide awake, reading in bed, rain drumming steadily on the roof. The sound rose from the vent like smoke, soft at first, then clearer, not mechanical, not air. It sounded like words, like someone speaking very quietly, the way you talk to yourself when you think no one's listening. My whole body went cold. I muted my phone, held my breath, strained to hear. The murmuring continued for maybe 10 more seconds, then stopped. Just stopped, mid-syllable, like whoever was speaking had suddenly realized they were being too loud. I sat frozen for a long time after that, staring at the vent, waiting for it to start again. It didn't. The rational part of my brain scrambled for explanations. A neighbor's TV, maybe. Sound carrying through the foundation or the walls. These old houses shared so much infrastructure. Who knew what was connected to what? That had to be it. It had to be. I started sleeping with white noise on my phone after that, loud enough to drown out anything I didn't want to hear. Around the same time, I started noticing other things. Small things, easy to dismiss. A kitchen cabinet left open that I was certain I'd closed. The bread disappearing faster than I was eating it. A blanket that had been draped over the couch now folded neatly on the armchair. I blamed myself. I was tired, still adjusting to living alone, still rewiring my brain after years of sharing space with someone else. Of course I was forgetting things. Of course I was misremembering. That's what happens when you're stressed. Felix seemed off too, jumpier than usual, his ears always swiveling toward sounds I couldn't hear. Sometimes I'd find him sitting in the hallway, perfectly still, staring at the basement door like he was waiting for something. When I picked him up, he'd be trembling. "It's just an old house, buddy," I'd tell him. "You'll get used to it." But my voice never sounded as confident as I wanted it to. One evening, walking from the kitchen to the living room with a cup of tea, I stopped in front of the basement door. I don't know why. Something just made me pause, my hand inches from the worn white paint. The door was closed, same as always. The hook latch hung loose, unused. Nothing was different. But standing there, I felt something I couldn't explain, a heaviness, a presence, like the air on the other side of that door was watching me back. I laughed out loud, the sound too sharp in the quiet hallway. "You're losing it, Maya." Walked away, didn't open the door. The rain picked up outside, and I focused on that instead. Then came the night I woke at 3:17 a.m. I don't know what pulled me out of sleep. Some sound beneath the white noise, some shift in the air. But suddenly I was awake, completely awake, staring at the ceiling in the dark. And I heard it, the whispering, clearer than before, rising from the vent by my closet. A voice, definitely a voice, definitely human, speaking in a low, continuous murmur. The tone was almost conversational, like someone narrating their own thoughts. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, every muscle in my body locked tight as I lay there, straining to make out the words. I couldn't. They slipped away every time I almost grasped them, dissolving into the white noise and the rain. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse. I lay there until dawn, watching the gray light slowly fill my room, too terrified to move, too terrified to get up and check. I told myself I was dreaming. Hypnagogia, that weird state between sleep and waking where your brain plays tricks on you. I'd Googled it once. It was a real thing. It happened to people. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself. The days that followed were an exercise in willful ignorance. I noticed the food disappearing, lunch meat I'd just bought, gone in 2 days. Found the empty package in the trash. Felix didn't eat lunch meat, but I must have eaten it, right? Stress makes you forget things. Everyone knows that. One night, Felix sat in the hallway for 3 hours straight, staring at the basement door. Wouldn't move, wouldn't eat, wouldn't come when I called. Just sat there, statue still, watching. When I finally picked him up, he was shaking so hard I could feel it in my chest. "It's okay," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "It's nothing. It's just an old house." But I didn't believe it anymore. And I think, deep down, I knew what I had to do. I had to go into that basement. I decided to do it during the day, sunlight streaming through the windows, phone fully charged in my hand, every light in the house turned on. If I was going to prove to myself that I was being ridiculous, I was going to do it on my terms. I stood in front of the basement door for a full minute before I could make myself reach for the knob. My hand was shaking. I could hear my own heartbeat, feel it thudding against my ribs like something trying to escape. "This is stupid," I whispered. "There's nothing down there." The knob was cold under my fingers. I turned it, pulled the door open, and stared down into the dark. The stairs descended steeply, wooden and worn, disappearing into shadow. The smell hit me first, that damp, musty basement smell I remembered. But underneath it, something else. Something I couldn't quite place. Sour. Organic. I fumbled for the light switch. The bare bulb flickered on, casting a weak yellow glow that barely reached the bottom of the stairs. I could see the concrete floor down there, the edge of my stacked boxes, a sliver of the water heater. One step, then another. The stairs creaked under my weight, each sound impossibly loud in the silence. I kept my phone raised, thumb hovering over the emergency call button, telling myself this was overkill, telling myself I'd laugh about this later. The basement opened up around me as I reached the bottom, my boxes against one wall, still taped shut, exactly where I'd left them. The water heater humming softly in its corner. The furnace, old, hulking, metal, crouching in the shadows like something waiting. Above me, the ductwork spread across the ceiling, gray metal veins branching toward every room in the house, toward the vents, toward my bedroom. I moved slowly, checking behind my boxes first. Nothing, just concrete and dust and a dead spider curled in on itself. The space behind the water heater was clear too, pipes and valves and a film of grime, but nothing else. I was starting to feel foolish. Of course there was nothing down here. What had I expected? Some movie monster lurking in the corner. This was real life. Things like that didn't happen in real life. Then I walked around the furnace, The corner behind it was darker than the rest of the basement, tucked into the angle where two concrete walls met. I almost didn't see it at first. Almost turned around and went back upstairs, satisfied that I'd checked, ready to laugh at myself. But something made me stop. Something made me look closer. There was a pile of blankets on the floor, old, stained, arranged almost like a nest, and scattered around them, wrappers, food wrappers, crackers, bread, lunch meat, my food, my lunch meat that I thought I'd eaten. A plastic jug of water sat nearby, half empty. Clothes were stuffed behind a pipe, a jacket, a hoodie, both filthy, both reeking of that sour smell I'd noticed on the stairs. Someone had been living in my basement. My legs went out from under me. I grabbed the furnace to keep from falling, the metal cold and rough against my palm. My vision narrowed, tunneling down to that pile of blankets, those wrappers, that jug of water. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The air had turned to concrete in my lungs. How long? How long had someone been down here? Days? Weeks? The whole time I'd been living above them, sleeping above them, thinking I was alone. Every shadow in that basement suddenly looked like a person. Every dark corner, every space behind a pipe or beneath a shelf. They could be hiding. They could be watching me right now, waiting for me to turn my back. I started backing toward the stairs, slowly. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, shaking so badly I could barely control them. I kept my eyes moving, scanning every inch of the basement, terrified that at any moment I'd see movement. A shape rising from the darkness. A face. The stairs were behind me. I could feel them. I reached back, found the railing, and nearly sobbed with relief. I went up those stairs faster than I've ever moved in my life. Hands and feet scrambling, phone clenched in my fist, breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I burst through the doorway, slammed the basement door shut, and fumbled with the hook latch. That stupid little hook I'd never used, hands shaking so hard I could barely get it into the eye. It clicked into place. I backed away from the door, staring at it like something might burst through at any second. My chest was heaving. My whole body was trembling. Felix was nowhere to be seen. Hiding, probably, the way animals do when they sense something wrong. I raised my phone, tried to dial. My fingers wouldn't work right, kept hitting the wrong numbers. I had to stop, take a breath, force myself to focus. It rang once, twice. 911, what's your emergency? My voice came out cracked, barely above a whisper. Someone's been living in my basement. I found where they've been sleeping. I don't know if they're still down there, please. Please, I need someone to come. The dispatcher's voice was calm, steady. She asked for my address. I gave it, stumbling over the numbers. She told me officers were on the way. Told me to stay away from the basement door. Told me to stay on the line. I backed into the kitchen, grabbed a knife from the block, and stood there shaking, watching the basement door, waiting. The rain had started again outside. I could hear it drumming on the roof, running down the windows, filling the silence between my ragged breaths. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. Nothing would ever feel comforting in that house again. The police arrived in 12 minutes. It felt like 12 hours. I watched through the front window as the cruiser pulled up, lights off. 2 officers stepping out into the rain. A man and a woman, both young, both with that careful alertness cops get when they don't know what they're walking into. I let them in before they could knock. My hand was still gripping the knife. The male officer, his name tag said Reyes, asked me to put it down. His voice was calm, the way you talk to someone who might shatter. I set the knife on the counter and immediately felt more vulnerable without it. I told them everything. The whispering, the food, Felix's behavior, what I'd found behind the furnace. They listened without interrupting, exchanging glances I couldn't read. You said the basement door has a latch, the female officer said. Martinez, according to her badge. Is it still secured? I nodded. Hadn't taken my eyes off that door since I'd locked it. Okay, we're going to check it out. I need you to stay up here. She looked at me, really looked at me. Is there somewhere you can wait? Another room? I shook my head. I wasn't going anywhere. I couldn't see that door. Reyes unholstered his flashlight. Martinez did the same. They moved to the basement door with a kind of synchronized precision that told me they'd done this before. Reyes unhooked the latch. Martinez positioned herself to the side, hand resting on her weapon. The door swung open. "Police!" Reyes called into the darkness. "If anyone is down there, make yourself known." Silence. Just the hum of the furnace and the rain on the roof. They descended together, flashlight beams cutting through the shadows. I stood in the hallway, arms wrapped around myself, shaking so hard my teeth were chattering. I could hear their footsteps on the wooden stairs, hear them moving across the concrete floor, murmured words I couldn't make out. The weight was unbearable. When they finally came back up, maybe 15 minutes later, their expressions had changed. Something tight around the eyes, something careful in the way they moved. "There's no one down there now," Martinez said. "But you were right. Someone was definitely living in your basement." The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. Part of me had still been hoping I was wrong, hoping I'd imagined it, misinterpreted it, made something out of nothing. "We found more than what you described," Reyes added. He was holding his phone, photos on the screen. "There's clothing stuffed behind one of the pipes, more food wrappers going back at least a few weeks based on the decomposition, and there are scratch marks near several of the vent openings." Scratch marks? Like someone was trying to see through them, or... He hesitated, or had been looking through them regularly. My stomach turned, the vents, the whispering. Oh God. There's something else. Martinez's voice was gentle but firm. "Can you show us the vent in your bedroom?" I led them down the hall on legs that barely worked. My bedroom door was open, the bed unmade, everything exactly as I'd left it that morning. The vent sat in the floor near my closet, that old metal grate I'd never thought twice about. Reyes crouched down beside it, shone his flashlight across the surface. Then he pulled out a multi-tool and carefully pried up one corner. The screws were stripped, not rusted or worn, stripped from the inside. "Someone's been removing this," he said quietly, "and putting it back." I couldn't feel my body anymore. Couldn't feel anything except a cold, spreading horror that started in my chest and radiated outward until it filled every inch of me. "The ductwork in your basement connects to these floor vents," Martinez explained. "Someone small enough or determined enough could potentially move through them, at least partially, enough to..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Enough to watch me. Through the vent in my bedroom floor, while I slept, while I changed, while I cried over my breakup, thinking I was alone, thinking no one could see. The whispering. It wasn't sound traveling through the ducts. It was someone in the ducts, talking to themselves while they watched me. "There's one more thing." Reyes stood, holding something in a gloved hand. A small spiral notebook, the kind you can buy anywhere for $1. "We found this behind the furnace, tucked under the blankets." He opened it, showed me the pages, my schedule, written in cramped, slanted handwriting. What time I woke up, 7:15 a.m. What time I went to bed, usually 10:30 p.m., sometimes 11. When I showered, mornings, around 7:30. When I was on work calls, the hours varied, but they were all logged. When I cooked, when I watched TV, when I let Felix out of the bedroom, everything, every detail of my life, catalogued by someone living beneath my feet. I made it to the bathroom before I threw up. Martinez held my hair back while I heaved into the toilet, her hand steady on my shoulder. I couldn't stop shaking, couldn't stop seeing those pages, that handwriting, the meticulous record of my existence. They'd been studying me, learning me, and I had no idea why. The officers checked the rest of the house after that. Found a small window in the basement, one I'd never really noticed, with a broken latch. That's how they'd been getting in and out, probably at night while I slept, or during the day when I was on calls with my headset on, oblivious to anything that wasn't coming through the microphone. They could have been coming and going for weeks. "You can't stay here tonight," Martinez said. It wasn't a suggestion. I nodded. I couldn't have stayed there if she'd paid me. I packed a bag with shaking hands, stuffed Felix into his carrier, and drove to Sarah's apartment through the rain. I don't remember the drive. Don't remember anything except the images cycling through my head. The blankets, the wrappers, the stripped screws, the notebook. I didn't sleep that night. I'm not sure I really slept for weeks. I never went back to that house alone. When I finally returned to pack my things, Sarah came with me. So did her boyfriend Marcus and another friend from work. 4 of us in the middle of the day, every light blazing. I still couldn't make myself look at the basement door. We packed everything in under 2 hours. I left behind anything that had been near a vent, the rug from my bedroom, the chair that sat beside the living room grate. I couldn't stand the thought of keeping them. Couldn't stand the thought of what might have been watching me through those metal slats while I sat there, read there, existed there, in what I thought was privacy. The landlord was understanding when I called to break my lease. I think the police had already contacted him. He didn't charge me the penalty, didn't ask questions, just told me he was sorry and that he'd have the locks changed and the basement window replaced, as if new locks could fix what had happened, as if anything could. The police followed up a few times over the following weeks. Detective Morrison, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, handled my case. She told me they'd dusted for fingerprints, but didn't get any matches in the system. Whoever had been living in my basement had never been arrested, never been printed, never been caught for anything before. Or they'd been careful, worn gloves, thought ahead. That possibility haunted me more than I could explain. They canvassed the neighborhood, asked if anyone had seen anything suspicious. No one had. In a neighborhood full of older couples and quiet families, no one had noticed a stranger coming and going from the little house on Maple Street. No one had seen anything wrong. The case went cold within a month. There were no leads, no suspects, no answers. Detective Morrison called me one last time to tell me they'd keep the file open, but I could hear it in her voice. They weren't going to find whoever did this. They were never going to find them. I think about the timeline a lot, based on the evidence, the food wrappers, the state of the blankets, the wear patterns in the ductwork near the vents. They estimated the person had been there for at least 3 weeks, maybe longer, maybe since the beginning, 3 weeks, maybe more. 3 weeks of someone beneath my floor while I slept, while I worked, while I talked to my mom on the phone and cried about Kyle and danced around my kitchen to music I thought no one else could hear. 3 weeks of someone crawling through the ductwork, positioning themselves beneath the vent in my bedroom, watching me through those narrow slats. I think about what they saw, what they heard, the moments I thought were mine and mine alone. They were witnessed, cataloged, written down in that little spiral notebook like data points in an experiment. I think about the whispering, too. What were they saying in those moments when they thought I couldn't hear? Were they narrating what they saw, talking themselves through it? Or were they talking to me in some twisted way, whispering things they wanted me to know but couldn't say out loud? I'll never have answers to those questions. That's the part that still keeps me up at night. I moved into a second-floor apartment after that. No basement, no floor vents. Radiator heat only. The old-fashioned kind that clanks and hisses but doesn't require ductwork snaking through the walls. I checked every closet, every crawl space, every access point before I signed the lease. Made the landlord show me the building's basement, A communal storage area with a lock on the door and no connecting passages. Sarah was my roommate for the first 6 months. I couldn't be alone. Couldn't stand the silence of an empty apartment, the vulnerability of being the only person behind a locked door. Every creak, every settling sound, every noise I couldn't immediately identify sent my heart racing. Felix came with me, of course. He's calmer now, in the new place. Doesn't stare at doors anymore. Doesn't tremble for no reason. I think animals know things we don't. I think he knew, long before I did, that we weren't alone in that house. I should have listened to him. I should have listened to myself. The thing is, I knew something was wrong. I felt it, in the basement door that seemed to watch me, in the sounds I couldn't explain, in the small things that didn't add up. But I talked myself out of it every time, told myself I was being paranoid, being dramatic, being one of those people who jumps at shadows. I wasn't being paranoid. I was right. And I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. That's what I want people to understand, if they take anything from this. Your instincts exist for a reason. That feeling you get, the one that tells you something isn't right. It's not anxiety. It's not overthinking. It's your brain picking up on patterns your conscious mind hasn't processed yet. It's a survival mechanism, millions of years old, and we've trained ourselves to ignore it because we don't want to seem rude or crazy or paranoid. Don't ignore it. Check, investigate, call someone. Do whatever you have to do to make sure you're safe, even if you feel foolish, even if you turn out to be wrong, because I was right. And if I'd checked sooner, if I'd gone into that basement the first time I heard the whispering, instead of convincing myself it was just the house settling, maybe I would have found them before they had 3 weeks to study me. Maybe I would have found them before they knew my schedule better than I did. Or maybe I would have found them while they were still down there. I try not to think about that possibility too much. It's been 2 years now. I have my own place again, finally. Still no floor vents. Still no basement. I check my locks 3 times before bed and keep a bat beside my nightstand. I don't walk around naked anymore, not even in my own bathroom. Some part of me will always feel watched. I never found out who they were. Never found out what they wanted. Never found out if I was their first or just one of many. And sometimes, late at night, when I hear rain on the roof and the radiator clicking and all those small sounds that used to bring me comfort, I wonder if they ever found someone else. Some other woman, living alone, trying to build a life in a house with floor vents and an unfinished basement. I hope not. God, I hope I was the only one, but I don't think I was, and that's what scares me most of all.